Hi guys, tonight we step into a world that feels both distant and strangely familiar. A vast and quiet landscape shaped by ice, wind and time itself. You find yourself standing beneath a pale sky, the light soft and diffused, as if the sun is still deciding whether to fully rise. The air is cold but not biting. It settles gently against your skin like a quiet reminder that this world moves at a slower rhythm. Around you, the land stretches wide and open, dotted with low grasses, scattered shrubs, and distant ridges of ice that glow faintly in the early light. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and your local time in the comments. It is always comforting to know where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights and you begin to walk forward, your footsteps soft against the frozen ground. This is Earth around 13,000 years ago, near the end of the last great ice age. A commonly accepted understanding is that vast ice sheets still cover large parts of North America and northern Europe, some stretching kilometers thick, pressing down on the land beneath them. These enormous bodies of ice have shaped rivers, carved valleys, and redirected entire ecosystems over thousands of years. As you look ahead, you notice how the landscape feels open and quiet, almost spacious in a way that modern environments rarely are. There are no roads, no distant hum of engines, no artificial lights interrupting the horizon. Just the gentle movement of wind through dry grasses and the occasional distant call of an animal you cannot quite see. The temperature here is cooler than what you might be used to even in winter, yet it is not unbearable. You pull your imagined cloak a little tighter around your shoulders, feeling the coarse texture of woven fibers, perhaps made from animal hide or plant material. Early humans living in this time relied on such materials for warmth crafting clothing that was practical rather than decorative. You pause for a moment and breathe in. The air carries a faint earthy scent mixed with something crisp and clean like snow that has not yet fallen. It feels different from modern air, less heavy, less crowded. You might even find it calming. In this era, known to scientists as the late Pleistocene, the world has been locked in cycles of cold and warmth for tens of thousands of years. Glaciers advance and retreat slowly, almost like a long, steady breath taken by the planet itself. Some researchers suggest that these cycles are influenced by subtle changes in Earth's orbit and tilt patterns that unfold over immense spans of time. Others point to complex interactions between oceans, atmosphere, and ice, each part affecting the others in ways that are still not fully understood. As you continue walking, you notice faint tracks in the ground, large ones, deep impressions left behind by creatures much bigger than anything you might see today. This was a world shared with what we now call megafauna. Animals like woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats once moved across these plains. You do not see them clearly yet, but the signs are there. Broken grasses disturbed earth, a distant shifting shape near the horizon. It reminds you that you are not alone here. A widely accepted fact is that many of these large animals thrive during colder climates, their thick fur and massive bodies helping them survive in conditions that would challenge smaller species. Yet there is also something fragile about their presence, something that feels almost temporary when viewed from the perspective of history. You step carefully, feeling the ground beneath your feet. It is firm, slightly frozen, but not entirely solid. In some places, patches of thawed earth create a soft, uneven surface. The seasons here are beginning to shift, though slowly. And you might wonder, without fully realizing it yet, how stable this world really is. At first glance, everything feels steady. The ice has been here for generations beyond counting. The animals have adapted. Early humans have learned to survive, to hunt, to gather, to move with the rhythms of the land. There is a sense of balance, even if it is a delicate one. Small groups of humans live scattered across different regions, their lives shaped by necessity and close observation of nature. They follow animal migrations, gather edible plants, and make use of simple but effective tools crafted from stone, bone, and wood. Fire plays a central role in their survival, providing warmth, protection, and a way to prepare food. Some historians suggest that these communities had deep knowledge of their environment, understanding seasonal patterns and animal behavior with a precision that modern people might find surprising. At the same time, scholars remain divided on how quickly these groups could adapt to sudden environmental changes, especially ones that unfold over just a few generations. You notice a faint column of smoke rising in the distance. It is thin, almost blending into the pale sky. As you move closer, the shapes of a small human camp begin to emerge. Low shelters made from branches and animal hides sit close to the ground, arranged in a loose circle. A fire burns at the centre, its glow soft and steady, sending small sparks upward before they vanish into the air. The smell of smoke drifts toward you, warm and slightly sweet. You hear quiet movement, someone shifting, a soft murmur of voices, the gentle crackle of burning wood. This is daily life in this ancient world. Simple, yes, but not easy. Every day requires effort. Every resource must be found, prepared, and used carefully. There is no surplus, no safety net in the way we might think of it today. And yet there is also a kind of closeness here, a connection between people and their surroundings that feels direct and immediate. You sit for a moment near the edge of the camp, feeling the warmth of the fire against your face, while the cold air brushes lightly against your back. The contrast is comforting. A lesser-known detail is that early humans in this period often reused and reshaped their tools, many times conserving materials in ways that reflect a deep awareness of scarcity. Nothing is wasted if it can be repurposed. As the firelight flickers, you watch shadows move across the ground, stretching and shrinking with each small shift of the flames. It is quiet, almost meditative. But beneath this calm, something is beginning to change. You cannot see it yet. Not clearly. It does not announce itself with a noise or sudden movement. Instead, it exists as a subtle shift, a quiet imbalance building somewhere far beyond the horizon. The world you're standing in feels ancient and stable, but in truth it is approaching one of the most dramatic turning points in human history. And as you sit there, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the distant whisper of wind across the plains, you might begin to sense it. Not as fear, not as urgency, just a gentle, almost imperceptible awareness that the earth itself is preparing to change. You remain seated near the fire for a while longer, letting its warmth settle gently into your hands. The faint glow flickers across the ground, illuminating small details you might otherwise miss. A worn piece of bone used as a tool, a cluster of stones arranged with quiet intention, footprints overlapping in soft patterns, each one telling a small part of a much larger story. Eventually you rise. The air greets you again with its cool stillness, brushing lightly against your face as you step away from the camp. Behind you, the low murmur of voices continues steady and unhurried. Life here moves at a calm, deliberate pace, shaped by the land and the seasons rather than any strict measure of time. As you walk out across the open terrain, you begin to notice something subtle. The cold does not feel quite as constant as it once did. It is not a dramatic change, nothing that would alarm you. But there is a softness to the air at certain moments, a slight easing that comes and goes like a quiet breath. The ground beneath your feet, though still firm, holds more patches of dampness, where ice has begun to loosen its grip. A commonly accepted understanding is that around this time the Earth was slowly emerging from what scientists call the last glacial maximum, a period when ice sheets reached their greatest extent roughly 20,000 years ago. Since then, temperatures have been rising gradually, though the change unfolds so slowly that it is almost impossible to notice within a single lifetime. And yet here you are, sensing the earliest hints of that shift. You pause near a shallow depression in the land where a thin stream of water now trickles through. It is narrow, barely more than a ribbon, but it is new, perhaps only recently formed as melting ice begins to feed into small channels like this one. You crouch down and touch the water. It is cold, but not as biting as you might expect. It flows gently, carrying with it tiny particles of soil and stone. Over time, streams like this will grow joining together to form larger rivers, reshaping the land in quiet but powerful ways. Some researchers suggest that these early stages of warming triggered cascading effects across the planet. As ice melts, it exposes darker land and water, beneath which absorb more sunlight and further increase temperatures. Others point out that the process was not uniform, with some regions warming faster than others, creating a patchwork of changing environments. As you stand again, you notice the sky. There is something different about it. Not in colour, but in feeling. The winds seem to shift more frequently, carrying scents from distant places. A faint trace of moisture lingers in the air, hinting at changes in precipitation patterns that are still unfolding. You continue walking your path, taking you toward a distant rise in the land. From there you can see farther, and what you observe is both subtle and significant. In the distance, the edge of a glacier glows faintly under the pale light. It is massive, stretching across the horizon like a frozen wall. But if you look closely, you can see signs of retreat. The surface is uneven, broken in places where chunks of ice have fallen away. Small streams run along its edges, carving delicate paths through the frozen mass. These are not sudden collapses. They are slow, steady changes that unfold over years, decades, even centuries. You might wonder how anyone living in this time could truly grasp what is happening. The scale is simply too vast. And yet a lesser-known detail is that early human groups likely noticed gradual environmental changes through careful observation. Shifts in animal migration, the timing of plant growth, and the behaviour of rivers would all serve as quiet signals that something in the world was evolving. You take a moment to imagine returning to the camp and describing what you see. Perhaps you would not speak of glaciers retreating or global temperatures rising. Instead, you might say that the land feels different, that the water flows more freely, that certain animals are appearing in new places while others become harder to find. These small observations, shared and remembered, would form a kind of living knowledge passed from one generation to the next. As you move along the ridge, the ground becomes slightly softer. In places, patches of grass appear thicker, their colour shifting from dull yellow to a faint muted green. It is not lush, not yet, but it is a beginning. A widely accepted fact is that warming climates often lead to the expansion of vegetation zones, allowing plants to grow in areas that were previously too cold or dry. This in turn affects the animals that depend on those plants, creating a chain reaction that touches every part of the ecosystem. You notice small movements among the grasses. Insects subtle and easy to overlook move quietly through the stems. Their presence is another quiet indicator of change. Warmer conditions allow more species to thrive, increasing the complexity of the environment in ways that might not be immediately obvious. The wind picks up slightly, brushing across the landscape with a soft, continuous motion. It carries with it a mix of scents, earthwater, something faintly organic. It feels alive in a way that is difficult to put into words. And still everything remains calm. There is no urgency in the air, no sense of alarm. Just a slow, steady transformation unfolding across vast distances and long stretches of time. Some historians suggest that this period of gradual warming provided new opportunities for human groups, allowing them to explore different regions and access a wider variety of resources. Others caution that such changes also introduced new uncertainties, as familiar patterns became less reliable. You begin to walk back toward the camp, your steps unhurried. As you approach, you notice the fire has been tended, its flames now slightly higher, the smoke rising more steadily into the sky. People move about their tasks with quiet efficiency. One person adjusts a tool, another gathers small pieces of wood. A few sit together, their voices low and even. Life continues. And yet beneath this steady rhythm the world is shifting. The ice is melting. The waters are rising. The winds are changing. You settle once more near the edge of the camp, feeling the warmth of the fire return. The contrast between heat and cold is familiar now, almost comforting. You watch as a small ember drift upward, glowing briefly before fading into the pale sky. It is a small thing, easy to miss, but in its own way it mirrors the changes happening all around you. Quiet, gradual, and part of a much larger process that is only just beginning to reveal itself. You remain near the camp as the day slowly unfolds, the light growing a little stronger, though never harsh. It spreads gently across the land, revealing textures that were hidden in the earlier dimness. The ground shows faint ridges and shallow impressions. The grasses move in soft waves as the wind passes through them. Even the distant ice seems to shimmer slightly as if responding to something unseen. You begin to notice the wind more clearly now. At first, it feels like nothing more than a steady presence brushing against your clothing, moving strands of hair across your face. But as you stand still and pay closer attention, you realize it carries subtle differences. Sometimes it feels dry and cool. Other times it arrives with a faint softness, almost as if it has travelled over water or warmer ground before reaching you. A widely accepted fact is that wind patterns play a crucial role in shaping climate. They move heat and moisture around the planet, connecting distant regions in ways that are not always obvious. Even small shifts in these patterns can lead to significant changes over time. You turn your face slightly into the breeze, letting it pass over you. There is a scent within it, faint but present. Not just the dry open smell of grass and soil, but something deeper. Perhaps the distant hint of melting ice, or water gathering somewhere far beyond your view. You begin to walk again this time, following the direction of the wind. The land stretches wide ahead of you, but it does not feel empty. It feels connected, as though every part of it is quietly communicating with every other part. The sky above seems vast, yet somehow close, its pale colour shifting, almost imperceptibly, as thin clouds drift slowly across it. Some researchers suggest that around this time, changes in Earth's atmosphere were beginning to alter how heat was distributed across the globe. Variations in greenhouse gases, even small ones, could influence temperature and weather patterns in ways that ripple outward over centuries. Others note that the exact mechanisms remain complex, involving interactions between ocean currents, ice sheets, and solar energy. You continue walking your pace slow and steady. As you move, you notice the ground changing slightly beneath your feet. In some areas, the soil feels firmer and drier. In others, it yields just a little, as if holding more moisture than before. These differences are subtle, but they are becoming more frequent. You pause near a cluster of low shrubs. Their branches are thin but resilient, their leaves small and muted in colour. You reach out and touch one gently. It bends slightly, then returns to its shape. A small detail, but one that reflects a larger truth. Life here is adapted to survive in conditions that are often unpredictable. A lesser-known detail is that many plants during the late Ice Age developed strategies to endure both cold and dryness, such as slow growth cycles and the ability to conserve water. These traits allowed them to persist through changing climates, though not always without difficulty. You stand there for a moment watching as the wind moves through the shrubs, creating a soft rustling sound. It is calming, but as you listen you begin to notice something else. The rhythm of the wind is not entirely steady. There are moments when it strengthens slightly, then eases again. Moments when it shifts direction, even if only by a small degree. These changes are not dramatic, but they are consistent enough to catch your attention. You might wonder how something as simple as wind could signal deeper changes in the world, and yet scholars remain divided on how early shifts in atmospheric circulation may have contributed to the larger climate transformations that followed. Some suggest that changes in wind patterns could have influenced ocean currents, which in turn affected global temperatures. Others argue that the process was more complex, with multiple factors interacting at once. You begin to walk again this time, moving toward a slightly higher stretch of land, where the view opens up even more. From here you can see the horizon clearly. The sky meets the earth in a soft, almost seamless line. The light remains gentle, never harsh, never overwhelming. It feels as though the entire world is held in a quiet balance, and yet that balance is beginning to shift. You notice a thin layer of clouds forming in the distance. They are light and scattered, but they seem to gather more than they did before. Their movement is slow, almost drifting, but their presence suggests a change in how moisture is moving through the atmosphere. A commonly accepted understanding is that as temperatures rise even slightly, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. This often leads to changes in cloud formation and precipitation patterns, though the effects can vary widely from one region to another. You take a slow breath, letting the air fill your lungs. It feels different now, not warmer in any obvious way, but somehow fuller. You continue to observe, letting your senses guide you. The sound of the wind, the movement of the clouds, the subtle changes in the ground beneath your feet. Each detail is small on its own, but together they form a pattern, a quiet unfolding story of a world in transition. You begin to make your way back toward the camp once more. As you approach, the familiar shapes come into view. The low shelters, the steady fire, the people moving through their tasks with calm focus. Nothing here feels rushed. Nothing feels out of place. And yet, if you look closely, you might notice small adjustments. A piece of clothing pulled tighter against a sudden gust of wind. A glance toward the sky as if checking for signs that are not always easy to read. A slight shift in how resources are gathered or stored. These are not dramatic changes. They're quiet responses to subtle signals. Some historians suggest that early human communities were highly attuned to environmental cues, adapting their behavior in small ways that helped them survive in changing conditions. Others point out that such adaptations were not always enough, especially when changes occurred more rapidly than expected. You sit down once more near the fire, feeling its warmth steady and reliable. The contrast between the shifting world outside and the calm center of the camp is striking. You watch the flames move their light dancing across nearby surfaces. The wind continues to pass through the land, carrying with it hints of change that are still difficult to fully understand. And as you sit there listening, observing, and simply being present, you begin to sense that these subtle shifts in the air and sky are only the beginning. Something larger is building, not in a sudden or overwhelming way, but slowly, quietly, and with a persistence that cannot be ignored. You sit quietly for a moment longer, letting the warmth of the fire settle into your body before rising again. The air feels slightly different now, though it is difficult to describe exactly how. There is still a coolness, that familiar crisp edge, but beneath it something softer seems to be emerging. You step away from the camp once more, drawn by a faint sound in the distance. At first it is barely noticeable, a low continuous murmur that blends into the background of wind and movement. But as you walk toward it, the sound becomes clearer. Water. You follow it carefully, your footsteps steady against the uneven ground. The train begins to dip gently, and soon you find yourself standing at the edge of a wider stream than the one you noticed earlier. This one is different. It moves with more confidence, its surface reflecting the pale sky above in broken patterns of light. The current is still calm, but there is a sense of direction to it, as if it knows where it is going. You crouch near the edge and watch the water flow. A commonly accepted understanding is that as ice sheets begin to melt, they release enormous amounts of fresh water into rivers and lakes, gradually increasing their size and reach. Over time, these waterways reshape entire regions, carving new paths through the land. You dip your fingers into the stream again. The water is cold, but it feels alive in a way that is difficult to ignore. It carries tiny fragments of earth, bits of stone, traces of a landscape slowly being transformed. You lift your hand and let the droplets fall back, watching as they disappear into the current. Some researchers suggest that this steady increase in meltwater played a significant role in altering global conditions, not just on land, but also in the oceans. As fresh water flows outward, it can disrupt delicate balances that have existed for thousands of years. Others propose that these changes were uneven, with some regions experiencing dramatic effects, while others remained relatively stable. You stand and look downstream. The water winds gently through the land, disappearing into the distance. Along its edges, you notice something new. Green. It is faint at first, just a subtle shift in colour where plants seem slightly more vibrant. But as you walk alongside the stream, the difference becomes clearer. The grasses are thicker here, the soil darker. Life is gathering around the presence of water. A lesser-known detail is that even small increases in moisture can lead to noticeable changes in plant growth, creating pockets of richer vegetation that attract animals and in turn influence human activity. You pause and listen. The sound of the water is steady, almost rhythmic. It blends with the soft movement of wind and the occasional rustle of plants. It feels calming, like a quiet companion as you move through the landscape. But there is also a sense of movement here that was not as present before. The land is not just existing, it is shifting. You continue walking, following the stream as it widens slightly. In some places the banks appear recently formed, the edges still uneven where soil has been carried away. In others, small pools have gathered reflecting the sky in still, mirror-like surfaces. You kneel beside one of these pools and look into it. For a moment you see your reflection faint and blurred by the movement of the water. Then a ripple passes through and the image breaks apart. It reminds you how easily things can change. You rise again, your gaze moving outward across the landscape. In the distance you can see low areas where water has begun to collect more permanently. Shallow wetlands are forming their surfaces dotted with clusters of plants that were not present before. These are early signs of a transformation that will continue to unfold over generations. Some historians suggest that access to reliable water sources like these would have influenced where early human groups chose to settle, even if only temporarily. Others point out that such changes could also create new challenges as shifting water levels alter familiar routes and resources. You take a slow breath, the air now carrying a slightly different scent. There is moisture in it. A softness that was not as noticeable before. It mixes with the earthy smell of soil and the faint trace of plant life beginning to expand. As you turn back toward the camp, you notice something else. The ground beneath your feet is less rigid in places. Where once it felt firm and frozen, it now yields slightly, holding the imprint of your steps a little longer before settling back. This is not a dramatic transformation. It is quiet, gradual, but persistent. You walk carefully, feeling each step as the land subtly responds beneath you. It gives you a sense of connection, as though you are part of the same slow process unfolding all around you. When you reach the camp, the familiar scene greets you once more. The fire still burns steadily, its warmth reaching outward in a soft circle. People move through their tasks with the same calm focus as before, but if you watch closely, there are small differences. A container placed nearer to the fire, perhaps to dry. A tool adjusted slightly as if in response to changing conditions. A glance toward the direction of the stream you just left. These are small things, easy to overlook, and yet they reflect an awareness, a quiet recognition that the world is not entirely the same as it once was. Researchers continue to question how quickly early humans could perceive and respond to environmental shifts like these. Some believe that changes unfolding over decades would have been noticeable within a single lifetime, while others argue that the process may have felt more gradual, blending into the natural rhythm of life. You sit down once more, letting the warmth of the fire return to you. The sound of water is faint now, carried gently on the wind. It is still there, still moving, still shaping the land in ways that will only become fully clear with time. You watch as a small piece of wood shifts in the fire, sending a brief flare of light upward before settling again. And in that moment you sense something deeper. The earth is changing, not in sudden bursts, but in quiet, steady motions. Ice becoming water, water reshaping land, land inviting new life. A cycle that feels both ancient and newly awakened. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the distant murmur of the stream. And you realize that these gentle changes, so easy to miss, are slowly building towards something far greater. You sit by the fire as the light begins to soften again, though the day has not yet ended. Time here feels stretched, as if each moment lingers just a little longer than it should. The warmth on your face contrasts gently with the cool air resting along your back, creating a quiet balance that feels almost comforting. For a while, everything seems steady. The wind moves in slow, familiar patterns. The faint sound of water continues somewhere in the distance. The people around you carry on with their routines, their movements calm and practiced. And yet beneath this calm, something begins to shift. Not gradually this time. Not in the slow, patient way you've been noticing. But suddenly, you step away from the fire again, drawn by a change you cannot quite explain. The air feels sharper now, more direct, as if something has altered its path. You take a breath, and it feels colder than before. Not dramatically so, but enough to make you pause. You look up at the sky. The pale softness you noticed earlier has changed. The light is still there, but it feels thinner, less settled. The clouds appear more scattered, moving in ways that seem less predictable. A widely accepted fact is that around 12,900 years ago, the Earth experienced a sudden and dramatic cooling event known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures in some regions dropped quickly, reversing the gradual warming that had been taking place for thousands of years. You begin to walk your steps slightly quicker now, though not rushed. You're trying to understand what you're feeling. The wind shifts again. This time it carries a colder edge, one that settles deeper into your skin. It is no longer just a gentle presence. It feels purposeful, as if it has changed direction or origin. You pull your clothing closer around you, noticing how the fabric no longer feels quite as sufficient as it did earlier. Some researchers suggest that this sudden cooling may have been triggered by a disruption in ocean circulation, possibly caused by large amounts of fresh water entering the North Atlantic. Others point to the possibility of an external event such as a cosmic impact, though this remains a topic of ongoing discussion. You continue walking your eyes, scanning the landscape. At first the changes are subtle. The ground feels firmer again, as if the brief softness you noticed before has begun to fade. The small stream you visited earlier still flows, but its surface appears slightly calmer, its edges less active. You kneel beside it once more. The water's colder now. You can feel it immediately. It sends a sharper sensation through your fingers, a clear signal that something has shifted in the environment. You withdraw your hand slowly, watching as the droplets fall back into the stream. You stand and look around. The patches of green you noticed earlier seem less vibrant, their colour muted slightly. The air feels drier, the faint moisture you sense before now reduced. A lesser-known detail is that during the Younger Dryas, some regions experienced not only colder temperatures, but also drier conditions leading to changes in vegetation and water availability that affected both animals and human populations. You take a slow breath. It feels different. Cleaner perhaps, but also thinner. The softness you noticed before has given way to something more precise, more defined. You begin to make your way back toward the camp, your steps steady but more aware now. The land feels familiar but altered, as if it has quietly shifted beneath you without warning. As you approach, you notice the fire has been built higher. The flames rise more strongly and more wood has been gathered around it. People move with a slightly increased focus, their actions still calm but more deliberate. No one appears alarmed, but something has been noticed. A change in the air, a difference in the wind, a quiet signal that the world is no longer following the same path it was just beginning to take. Some historians suggest that early human groups would have responded to such changes by adjusting their daily routines, perhaps gathering more resources or reinforcing shelters in anticipation of harsher conditions. Others believe that the speed of the shift may have made it difficult to fully understand what was happening at first. You sit near the fire once more, extending your hands toward the warmth. It feels more necessary now. The contrast between heat and cold is stronger, more noticeable. You listen. The wind has changed its tone. It is still soft, still steady, but there is a sharper edge within it, a subtle intensity that was not there before. It moves through the camp, brushing against surfaces, shifting small objects, carrying with it a sense of movement that feels less predictable. You glance toward the horizon. The distant ice remains, but something about it feels different. It no longer seems to be retreating in the same quiet way. Instead, it appears still almost resistant, as if the process has paused. You might wonder how such a sudden shift could happen. how a world moving slowly toward warmth could be pulled back into cold. Researchers continue to question the exact cause, with some suggesting that massive releases of fresh water disrupted the flow of warm ocean currents, particularly those that carry heat toward northern regions. Without that steady movement of warmth, temperatures could drop quickly, even if the broader climate trend remained toward warming. Others point to alternative explanations, including volcanic activity or shifts in atmospheric circulation. The full picture remains complex, with evidence supporting multiple possibilities. You sit quietly, letting these thoughts settle. The fire crackles gently, its sound steady and reassuring. Around you, life continues, but with a slightly different rhythm. A bit more attention, a bit more care. The world has changed before, slowly and quietly. But this time feels different. This time the changes come quickly enough to be felt within a single moment. You watch as a small gust of wind moves through the camp, causing the flames to flicker and bend. For a brief second, the light shifts shadows, stretching and moving in new directions. Then it settles again, and you realize that this is only the beginning. The warmth that had just started to return has been interrupted. The earth has turned back toward cold. And you are here at the very moment when everything begins to change once more. You remain seated by the fire, watching the flames rise and settle in a steady rhythm. The warmth feels more important now, not just comforting but necessary. The air around you has changed in a way that is no longer subtle. It presses in a little closer, carrying a chill that lingers even when you turn your back to the wind. You pull your covering tighter, feeling the rough texture against your hands. It still protects you, but you sense that the cold has grown more persistent, less willing to fade as the day moves forward. When you stand, the ground beneath your feet feels firmer than it did before, as if the brief softness of thaw has been pulled back into stillness. You take a few steps away from the camp, your breath now slightly more visible, as it leaves your body in faint clouds. The wind meets you again. It is not harsh, not yet, but it carries a sharper tone. It moves with a quiet determination, slipping through gaps in your clothing, brushing across your skin with a cool precision that is difficult to ignore. You pause and look across the landscape. What you see is not a dramatic transformation, but a steady return to colder conditions. The grasses seem less flexible, their movement more restrained. The patches of damp ground have begun to stiffen again, holding their shape more firmly. A well-established finding is that during the Younger Dryas, temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere drop significantly within a relatively short period. In some areas, the cooling may have been severe enough to reverse many of the environmental changes that had just begun to take hold. You begin to walk your steps slow and deliberate. As you move, you notice how the sound of your footing has changed. The ground gives less now, producing a faint, crisp sound with each step. It is a small detail, but one that reflects a broader shift taking place all around you. In the distance, the stream you visited earlier still flows, but its movement appears quieter, its surface less active. You approach it carefully, crouching once more near its edge. The water is colder than before. There is no doubt about it now. You do not need to touch it to know. The air above it carries a chill that rises gently but unmistakably. The edges of the stream appear slightly more defined, as if the surrounding ground has tightened its hold. Some researchers propose that this cooling phase may have unfolded over just a few decades, which would have been fast enough for a single generation to notice clear differences in their environment. Others suggest that while the shift was rapid in geological terms, it may still have felt gradual to those living through it, blending into the natural variability of seasons. You stand again, your gaze moving outward. The distant ice now appears more stable, its surface less broken than before. The small streams that once trickled along its edges seem reduced, their paths less pronounced. It is as if the retreat has slowed, paused, or even reversed in some places. You take a slow breath. The air feels drier now, lacking the faint softness you noticed earlier. It carries less moisture, less of that subtle fullness that hinted at change. Instead, it feels clean and sharp like a clear winter morning. As you turn back toward the camp, you notice the sky. The clouds are thinner, more scattered, and the light they filter feels colder. It lacks the gentle diffusion you experienced before. Instead, it falls more directly, casting clearer, more defined shadows across the land. A lesser-known detail is that cooler climates often lead to reduced evaporation, which in turn can limit cloud formation and precipitation in certain regions. This can create conditions that are not only colder, but also drier, affecting both plant life and water availability. You walk steadily, your senses adjusting to this new state of the world. When you reach the camp, you immediately notice the difference. The fire is larger now. More wood has been gathered, stacked nearby in careful arrangement. The flames burn higher, their warmth extending farther, drawing people closer. Movements are still calm, but there is a clear intention behind them. You watch as someone adjusts a piece of hide along the edge of a shelter, securing it more tightly against the wind. Another person tends to the fire, adding wood with measured precision, ensuring it remains strong and steady. These are quiet responses. Not panic, not fear, but awareness. Some historians suggest that early human groups developed flexible strategies to cope with environmental uncertainty, including changes in shelter construction and resource management. Others argue that sudden shifts like this would have placed significant strain on communities, especially those already living close to the limits of survival. You sit down once more, extending your hands toward the fire. The warmth spreads slowly, reaching your fingers, then your palms, then deeper into your body. It feels grounding, something you can rely on even as the world outside becomes less predictable. You listen. The wind continues to move through the camp, its tone now more consistent. It no longer carries the faint hints of warmth you noticed earlier. Instead, it feels steady and cool, as though it has settled into this new pattern. You glance toward the horizon. The land stretches out as it did before, but it feels quieter in a different way. Not empty, but restrained, as if everything has drawn slightly inward, conserving energy, waiting. You might find yourself wondering how long this will last, whether the warmth will return, whether this colder state is temporary or part of something larger. Researchers continue to examine evidence from ice cores and sediment layers to understand the duration and impact of this cooling period. While there is broad agreement that the Younger Dryas lasted for over 1,000 years, the exact nature of its onset and its regional effects remain subjects of careful study. You sit quietly, letting these thoughts settle without urgency. The fire crackles softly, its sound steady and familiar. Around you, life continues, but with a subtle shift in rhythm. A bit more care in each movement. A bit more attention to the environment. The world has not stopped. It has simply changed direction. And as you watch the flames rise and fall, you begin to understand that this return to cold is not a brief interruption. It is a new chapter. One that will shape the land, the animals, and the people who live here in ways that are only just beginning to unfold. You sit close to the fire, your hands steady in the warmth, while the air beyond it feels sharper with each passing moment. The difference between heat and cold is no longer subtle. It defines your space, creating a small circle of comfort in a world that has grown more uncertain. For a while you simply listen. The wind moves with a quieter consistency, now no longer shifting between soft and gentle tones as it did before. It carries a steady chill brushing across the land with a calm persistence. The faint sound of water still lingers somewhere in the distance, though it feels less present than it once did. You lift your gaze toward the sky. It appears clear, almost too clear. The clouds that once gathered in soft patterns are thinner now, scattered lightly, as if something has disrupted their usual formation. The light feels colder, as it reaches the ground, lacking the softness that once made everything seem slightly muted. You begin to wonder, not with urgency but with a quiet curiosity. What could cause such a sudden return to cold? You rise slowly and take a few steps away from the fire, letting the air meet you again. It settles against your face with a clean, precise chill. You draw a breath and it feels lighter, almost sharper in your chest. You walk a short distance from the camp, your eyes adjusting to the wide openness of the landscape once more. Everything looks familiar, yet subtly altered. The grasses move less freely. The ground holds its firmness. Even the distant ice seems more still, as if it has regained strength. A widely discussed idea among scientists is that an external event may have played a role in triggering this sudden cooling. One possibility involves a comet or asteroid breaking apart in the atmosphere or striking parts of the Earth, releasing energy and debris that could have affected climate conditions. You pause, letting that thought settle. It feels distant, abstract, and yet the world around you seems to carry a faint echo of something larger, something beyond the quiet processes you have been observing. Some researchers propose that evidence for such an event can be found in unusual layers of sediment containing tiny particles that may have formed under extreme heat. Others suggest that these findings could be explained by more familiar processes, such as wildfires or volcanic activity. The explanation remains uncertain, with ongoing studies attempting to clarify what truly happened. You look up again, this time with a slightly different awareness. The sky is vast, open, but it no longer feels entirely distant. You imagine just for a moment what it would mean for something from beyond this world to influence it so directly. Not in a dramatic or visible way, but through subtle shifts that ripple outward over time. You lower your gaze and continue walking. The ground beneath your feet feels unchanged from a moment ago, but your perception of it has shifted. Each detail now seems connected to something larger. The firmness of the soil, the stillness of the ice, the clarity of the air. All of it feels like part of a system responding to forces that are not always visible. An often overlooked detail is that early human communities without written records or scientific instruments would have interpreted unusual environmental changes through observation and shared experience. A sudden shift in climate might have been understood not as a single event, but as a series of changes that gradually altered daily life. You imagine returning to the camp and trying to explain what you feel, not in terms of comets or atmospheric disturbances, but in simpler observations. The cold has returned, the wind has changed, the land feels different. These are the truths that matter here. You turn back toward the camp, your steps slow and steady. As you approach, the fire stands out clearly, its warm glow contrasting against the cooler tones of the surrounding landscape. People remain gathered near it, their movements calm but attentive. You notice how they sit a little closer together now, how the fire is maintained with greater care, how each action seems slightly more deliberate. These are quiet adjustments, but they reflect a deeper awareness. Opinions differ on how quickly early humans could connect environmental changes to specific causes. Some suggest that they focused primarily on immediate survival, responding to conditions as they arose. Others believe that patterns observed over time may have led to a more nuanced understanding of the world, even if it was expressed in ways different from modern science. You sit once more, extending your hands toward the fire. The warmth spreads slowly, grounding you again in the present moment. You listen to the soft crackle of burning wood, the gentle movement of people nearby, the distant whisper of wind across the plains. Everything continues, and yet everything has shifted. You glance once more toward the sky. It remains clear, quiet, unmoving in a way that feels almost deliberate. And you realize that whether or not a cosmic event played a role, the result is undeniable. The world has turned colder. The balance that once seemed to be guiding it toward warmth has been interrupted. You settle into the warmth of the fire, letting your thoughts slow. There is no urgency here, no need to solve the mystery. Only the quiet recognition that the earth is shaped by forces both seen and unseen. And as you sit there, surrounded by the steady presence of the camp, and the quiet vastness beyond it, you begin to understand that this moment is part of something far larger than any single explanation. A shift in climate, a change in direction, a reminder that even the most stable world can be altered in ways that are difficult to predict. The fire flickers gently, its light steady against the growing chill, and you remain there watching, listening, and slowly absorbing the quiet weight of a world that has changed once again. You sit close to the fire, feeling its steady warmth press gently against your hands, while the cold air settles more firmly across your shoulders. The contrast is sharper now, more defined, as if the world itself has chosen its direction and is no longer hesitating. For a while you remain still, The flames move in soft, repeating patterns. The sound is familiar, a quiet crackle that fills the space without overwhelming it. Around you, others remain calm, though their movements carry a subtle focus, an awareness that was not as present before. Eventually you rise again. You feel drawn outward toward the wider landscape, as if something beyond the camp is asking to be noticed more closely. The wind meets you almost immediately. It carries a steady chill brushing across your face with a cool precision. There is less variation now, less of the shifting softness you experienced earlier. Instead, it feels consistent, almost settled into this colder state. You begin to walk your steps slow and measured. The ground beneath you feels firm, holding its shape with little give. The faint dampness that once softened parts of the land has largely disappeared. In its place, there is a quiet stillness, a sense that moisture has retreated or been locked away. As you move farther from the camp, you find yourself thinking about the source of such a sudden shift. Not just the cold itself, but the mechanism behind it. Evidence suggests that one of the most important systems influencing Earth's climate lies far beyond what you can see here, deep within the oceans. Vast currents move slowly through the water, carrying warmth from one region to another, balancing temperatures across the planet. You pause and look out across the land, imagining those unseen movements. Some researchers propose that during this period large amounts of fresh water from melting glaciers may have flowed into the North Atlantic, disrupting these currents. Without the steady movement of warm water, colder conditions could spread more easily, particularly across northern regions. Others point out that the system is highly complex with many interacting factors, making it difficult to identify a single cause. The exact sequence of events remains a subject of careful investigation. You take a slow breath, letting the cool air settle into your lungs. It feels sharper than before, cleaner but also more empty, as if something has been removed. You continue walking, your attention drawn to the land around you. The stream you followed earlier is still present, but it appears quieter now. Its surface is smoother, its edges more defined. The surrounding vegetation looks slightly diminished, the faint richness you noticed before now reduced. A detail many people overlook is that changes in ocean circulation can influence not only temperature, but also rainfall patterns affecting ecosystems far from the source of the disruption. Even a distant shift in water movement can reshape entire landscapes over time. You kneel beside the stream once more. You do not touch the water this time. You simply observe it. It flows steadily, but without the subtle energy it once seemed to carry. The small ripples are fewer. The movement feels more restrained. You stand again and turn your gaze outward. The horizon stretches wide and quiet. The distant ice remains, appearing stable, almost unmoving. The sky above is pale and clear, with only thin traces of cloud drifting slowly across it. Everything feels composed, still, and yet beneath that stillness something essential has changed. You begin to walk back toward the camp, your steps unhurried. As you move, you notice how sound carries differently now. The wind seems to move in a more direct path, its tone steady and consistent. The faint sounds of distant movement feel sharper, less softened by moisture in the air. When you reach the camp, the fire stands out even more strongly against the surrounding cold. The flames rise higher, fed by carefully gathered wood. The warmth they produce feels deeper, more necessary. People remain close, their positions slightly tighter, their movements more intentional. You watch as someone adds another piece of wood to the fire, placing it with care. Another adjusts a covering along the edge of a shelter, ensuring it blocks the steady wind. These actions are quiet, but they carry meaning. They reflect an understanding that conditions have changed even if the full reason is not known. Experts continue to explore how disruptions in ocean currents may have triggered rapid climate shifts like this one. Some suggest that the sudden influx of fresh water weakened the circulation that normally carries warmth northward. Others emphasize that the timing and scale of these changes are still being studied, with new data offering fresh perspectives. You sit once more near the fire, extending your hands toward its warmth. The heat spreads slowly, easing the tension that is built in your fingers. You listen, The wind remains steady. The fire crackles softly. The distant world feels quieter, more restrained. You glance toward the horizon again. It looks the same as before, but you know it is not. The balance has shifted, not in a visible line or boundary, but in the subtle interactions between air, water, and land. You settle into your place, letting your body relax slightly as the warmth reaches deeper. There is no urgency here, no sudden movement, only the quiet awareness that the systems shaping this world have changed direction. The currents far away, unseen and silent, have altered their flow. And here in this open landscape you feel the result. A colder wind, a firmer ground, a world that has turned back towards stillness. You watch the fire for a while longer, letting your thoughts drift gently. The mystery of what caused this shift remains, but its presence is undeniable. And as the flames flicker softly in front of you, you begin to understand that even the most distant forces can shape the world beneath your feet in ways that are both subtle and profound. You remain seated by the fire, letting its steady warmth settle deeper into your body. The cold around you no longer feels like a passing phase. It has become part of the rhythm here, something constant, something that shapes each movement and decision. For a while you simply watch the flames. They move gently, rising and folding back into themselves, casting soft light across the ground. The shadows they create stretch and shift, forming quiet patterns that feel almost hypnotic. Then slowly your attention drifts outward again. You lift your gaze toward the horizon where the land meets the sky in a pale, endless line. Everything appears calm, still. Yet there is a quiet sense that the forces shaping this world are not limited to what you can see. You begin to wonder about the earth beneath your feet. Not the surface you walk on, but the deeper layers hidden far below. It is widely recognized that the earth is not a static place. Beneath the ground lies a dynamic interior where heat and pressure build over time. In certain moments that energy is released through volcanic activity, sending ash and gases into the atmosphere. You stand slowly, brushing your hands together, and begin to walk. The air greets you again with its steady chill. You move across the firm ground, your steps soft but deliberate. As you walk, you imagine what it might be like if the Earth itself had contributed to this sudden cooling. Some researchers propose that increased volcanic activity during this period could have played a role in lowering temperatures. When large eruptions occur, they can release fine particles into the atmosphere that reflect sunlight away from the planet, leading to temporary cooling. Others suggest that while volcanic events may have contributed in small ways, they are unlikely to explain the full scale and duration of the Younger Dryas cooling. The explanation, they argue, likely involves a combination of factors rather than a single cause. You pause, letting that idea settle. A world shaped by many forces, all interacting at once. You look up at the sky again. It appears clear, but you imagine what it might look like if filled with fine ash spreading slowly across vast distances. The light would change, the warmth would diminish. The balance between heat and cold would shift, even if only slightly. You take a slow breath. The air feels clean, but you cannot help noticing how precise it feels now, how sharply it settles in your chest. It lacks the softness that once hinted at warmth and moisture. You continue walking, your attention moving between the ground and the sky. The landscape around you remains quiet, but there are subtle signs of strain. The grasses appear more brittle. The soil holds its firmness with little variation. The small pockets of moisture you once observed have become less frequent. A detail often overlooked is that even modest volcanic activity, when sustained or repeated, can influence climate patterns over time by altering the amount of sunlight that reaches the surface. This effect can be gradual yet noticeable when combined with other changes already underway. You reach a slight rise in the land and stop. From here you can see farther across the terrain. The distant ice remains a steady presence, its surface smooth and reflective. The streams are still there, but quieter, their movement less pronounced. The sky stretches above in pale tones, carrying only thin traces of cloud. Everything feels composed yet restrained. You turn back toward the camp, your steps slow. As you approach, the fire once again becomes the center of your awareness. Its warmth contrasts strongly with the cool air drawing you in. People remain gathered near it, their movements calm but purposeful. Someone adjusts a piece of wood, ensuring the flames remain strong. Another checks the edges of a shelter, reinforcing it against the steady wind. These actions feel more deliberate now, more essential. You sit down once more, extending your hands toward the heat. The warmth spreads slowly, easing the tension in your fingers. You notice how closely everyone remains to the fire, how the space between individuals is narrowed slightly. It is not crowded, just closer. In response to the cold, experts continue to explore how volcanic influences might have interacted with other climate systems during this period. Some propose that even if eruptions were not the primary cause, they may have amplified existing cooling trends. Others emphasize that the timing of known volcanic events does not fully align with the onset of the Younger Dryas, leaving the question open. You listen quietly. The fire crackles. The wind moves steadily. The world beyond remains calm yet altered. You glance toward the horizon once more. It looks unchanged at first, but you know better now. The processes shaping it are ongoing, subtle and interconnected. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. There is no urgency in your thoughts, only a quiet curiosity, a sense that the earth is responding to forces both above and below each, contributing in its own way to the conditions you now experience. The cold is not random, it is part of a system, a result of interactions that stretch across ocean's atmosphere and even the hidden depths beneath your feet. You watch the flames rise and fall, their light steady and reassuring. And as you sit there surrounded by the quiet presence of the camp and the vast landscape beyond you, begin to understand that this colder world is shaped by more than a single cause. It is the result of many forces working together, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict, and you're here feeling their combined effect in the steady chill of the air and the quiet persistence of the wind. You sit quietly for a while longer, letting the warmth of the fire settle into your body as the cold air lingers just beyond its reach. The balance between warmth and chill has become a defining feature of this place, shaping where you sit, how you move, even how long you remain still. Eventually you rise again. There is something drawing your attention outward, not urgent but persistent. A quiet sense that the land itself is continuing to change, even if those changes are not always easy to see. You step away from the camp, your feet pressing lightly against the firm ground. The surface feels more stable now than it did before, as if the brief softness of thaw has fully retreated. Each step produces a faint, crisp sound that echoes softly in the stillness. As you walk, you begin to notice the landscape with a sharper awareness. The grasses stretch across the land in muted tones, their colour subdued. They move less freely in the wind, their motion restrained. The patches of richer vegetation you observed earlier seem diminished, their presence reduced to small scattered clusters. Evidence indicates that rapid cooling events can quickly alter plant distribution, forcing vegetation to retreat or adapt to harsher conditions. Even slight changes in temperature and moisture can shift the balance, favouring some species while limiting others. You pause near a low stretch of land where water once gathered more freely. Now it appears different. The surface is firmer, the edges more defined. The shallow pools that once reflected the sky have either shrunk or disappeared, leaving behind faint impressions in the soil. The ground holds its shape, no longer yielding easily under your weight. You crouch down and run your hand lightly across the surface. It feels dry, not completely devoid of moisture, but lacking the softness you remember. A small but interesting detail is that drying conditions often follow rapid cooling in certain regions, as reduced evaporation and shifting weather patterns limit the availability of water. This can create environments that are both cold and dry, placing additional stress on plants and animals alike. You stand again, your gaze moving outward. In the distance, the horizon appears unchanged, but the closer details tell a different story. The subtle richness that once hinted at renewal has faded. In its place there is a quiet stillness, a sense of the land holding itself in a more rigid state. You continue walking your steps unhurried. The wind moves steadily across the terrain, its tone consistent. It no longer carries the faint hints of moisture or warmth you noticed earlier. Instead, it feels clean, precise, and cool, shaping the environment in quiet but persistent ways. You follow a gentle rise in the land, climbing just enough to gain a broader view. From here, the changes become more apparent. The landscape feels more uniform, less varied in texture and colour. The contrast between wetter and drier areas is diminished, replaced by a more consistent pattern of firmness and restraint. You take a slow breath, letting the air settle in your lungs. It feels lighter, sharper, as if the world has simplified itself. You might find yourself wondering how long it takes for such changes to become fully visible. Whether a single lifetime is enough to witness the transformation, or whether it unfolds across generations in ways that are only recognized in hindsight. Experts have not reached a full consensus on how quickly ecosystems responded to the onset of the Younger Dryas. Some evidence suggests that certain regions experienced rapid shifts in vegetation, while others changed more gradually, influenced by local conditions and geography. You turn back toward the camp, your steps steady. As you approach, the familiar shapes come into view once more. The low shelters, the steady fire, the quiet movement of people continuing their daily routines. But even here, within this small circle of human activity, the changes are present. You notice how materials are gathered and ranged with greater care, how the fire is maintained more consistently, its size and strength carefully managed, how people remain closer together, their positions reflecting a shared awareness of the colder conditions. These are not dramatic responses. They are subtle adjustments, quiet shifts in behavior that reflect an understanding, even if unspoken, that the environment has changed. You sit down near the fire again, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads slowly, easing the tension in your fingers. You feel it move through your body, a steady and reassuring presence, in contrast to the chill that surrounds you. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves across the camp. The distant land remains still. There is a rhythm here, different from before but steady in its own way. You glance toward the horizon once more. It looks calm, unchanging, but you know now that the calm is only on the surface. Beneath it, the forces shaping this world continue to move, to interact, to influence one another in ways that are not always visible. You settle back slightly, letting your body relax. There is no urgency in your thoughts, only a quiet awareness. The land has transformed, not through sudden, visible upheaval, but through a series of small, persistent changes that have reshaped its character. The softness has given way to firmness. The moisture has retreated. The balance has shifted. And you're here experiencing it not as a distant event, but as a lived reality. The fire flickers gently in front of you, its light steady against the growing stillness of the world beyond. And as you sit there, you begin to understand that these changes, though subtle in each moment, are part of a much larger transformation, one that continues to unfold quietly and steadily, shaping everything in its path. You remain close to the fire, letting its warmth settle into your hands, while the air beyond it feels increasingly distant, as if the cold has claimed more of the world outside that small circle of heat. The contrast is familiar now, almost expected. Yet it still draws your attention each time you shift your position. After a while, you stand again. Your body adjusts slowly, the cool air meeting you with a quiet firmness. You take a step, then another, moving away from the fire and back into the open landscape. The ground beneath your feet feels steady and unyielding, each step producing that faint, crisp sound you've come to recognize. As you walk, your attention shifts outward once more. There is movement in the distance. At first it is subtle, barely noticeable against the muted tones of the land. But as you focus, shapes begin to form, large ones, slow-moving yet purposeful. You pause, standing still as you observe. A group of animals moves across the plain, their forms heavy and deliberate. Their bodies are covered in thick fur, their movements steady and measured. These are creatures built for cold conditions, adapted over generations to survive in an environment that demands resilience. Research shows that during the late Ice Age, animals such as woolly mammoth, steppe bison and reindeer thrived in open cold environments, where grasses dominated the landscape. Their size and physical traits allowed them to endure conditions that would challenge smaller or less specialized species. You watch them carefully. They move together not hurried, but not entirely relaxed either. There is a sense of direction in their path as if they are following something known only to them. Perhaps a memory, perhaps a pattern passed through generations. You begin to walk slowly along the edge of their path, keeping your distance. The wind carries their scent faintly toward you, a mix of earth and animal, grounding you in the reality of their presence. As you observe, you notice something subtle. Their numbers are not as large as you might expect. The group feels smaller, more scattered. A quieter point is that fossil records from this period suggest many large animal populations began to decline around the end of the Ice Age. The reasons are complex, involving both environmental changes and possibly increasing human activity. You stop again, watching as one of the animals lowers its head to the ground, searching for something beneath the grasses. The movement is slow, deliberate, requiring effort. The land no longer offers abundance as easily as it once might have. You might find yourself wondering how these creatures adapt when conditions change so quickly. Whether their instincts are enough to guide them through a world that no longer behaves as expected. Different interpretations exist about the causes of these population changes. Some researchers emphasize the role of climate shifts, noting how rapid cooling and drying could reduce available food sources. Others suggest that human hunting may have contributed, especially as human populations expanded into new areas. You continue walking your steps, careful, your presence quiet. The animals move farther into the distance, their shapes gradually blending into the landscape. You watch until they're no longer clearly visible, only faint movements against the horizon. Then you turn back toward the camp. As you walk, the stillness of the land becomes more noticeable. The wind continues its steady path, carrying with it the same cool, consistent tone. The grasses move lightly, but without the richness you noticed earlier. The ground remains firm, holding its shape with quiet certainty. When you reach the camp, the fire greets you once more, its warmth steady and inviting. You sit down, extending your hands toward the flames. The heat spreads slowly, easing the coolness that has settled into your fingers. Around you, others continue their quiet routines. Someone adjusts a tool, another checks the edge of a shelter. Movements are calm, but there is an underlying attentiveness, a shared awareness that the environment has shifted. You glance toward the direction where you saw the animals. They are no longer visible, but their presence lingers in your thoughts. You consider how their lives are shaped by the same changes you are experiencing. The colder air, the firmer ground, the reduced vegetation. Everything is connected. An often overlooked detail is that large animals require vast amounts of food to sustain themselves, making them particularly vulnerable to even small reductions in plant availability. When conditions change quickly, their size, once an advantage, can become a challenge. You listen to the fire crackle softly. The sound is steady, reassuring. It contrasts with the quiet uncertainty of the world beyond. You might wonder how long these animals will continue to roam this land, whether they will adapt, move, or gradually disappear as conditions continue to shift. The answer is not clear. The explanation remains uncertain, shaped by multiple factors that interact over time. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. The warmth feels constant, something you can rely on even as the larger world changes. The animals you saw are part of this moment just as you are. Living, moving, responding. The cold has returned, and with it comes a new set of challenges. Not dramatic, not immediate, but persistent. You watch the flames rise and fall, their light steady against the growing stillness. And as you sit there, you begin to understand that the changes affecting this world are not limited to the land itself. They reach into the lives of every creature that depends on it, quietly, steadily, shaping the path forward in ways that are only just beginning to reveal themselves. You sit quietly after returning to the fire, your thoughts still lingering on the animals you saw in the distance. Their slow movements, their reduced numbers, the quiet effort in each step. It stays with you, even as the warmth begins to ease the chill from your hands. The fire crackles softly, its light steady and calming. For a moment, everything feels still again, but now you notice things differently. You rise once more, not out of urgency but curiosity. There is a quiet pull to understand more about what is happening to the creatures that share this land with you. You walk away from the camp, your steps measured, your breath calm. The air greets you with its familiar coolness settling lightly against your skin. The ground beneath you remains firm, each step producing that faint, crisp sound. As you move across the landscape, your attention sharpens. You begin to notice smaller signs. Not the large animals this time, but traces they leave behind. Faint tracks pressed into the soil, broken grasses, areas where the ground has been disturbed. You follow one such trail. It leads you toward a slightly lower stretch of land where the grasses grow a little thicker than in the surrounding area. Here the wind is gentler and the earth seems to hold just a bit more life. You pause and look closely. The plants here are not lush, but they are present. Enough to attract animals, enough to sustain them at least for now. Research suggests that during periods of environmental stress, animals often concentrate around remaining pockets of resources, leading to increased competition and pressure on those areas. You take a slow breath, letting the quiet settle around you. Then you notice something else. A stillness. Not the peaceful kind you have come to recognize, but a different kind. A subtle absence. You step forward carefully. There, partially hidden among the grasses, lies the remains of a large animal. It is not recent. Time has already begun its work. The form is still recognizable, but the details are softened. The land has begun to reclaim it. You stop at a respectful distance. There is no sense of alarm here, only quiet observation. A small but meaningful detail is that many large Ice Age animals began to disappear within a relatively short span of time, leaving behind remains that provide clues to their lives and their decline. You look around. The landscape continues as it always has, the wind moving steadily, the sky pale and open. Yet this single presence tells a different story, one of change, of loss, of a world that no longer supports life in the same way it once did. You might wonder how often scenes like this appeared during this time. Whether they were rare or becoming more common with each passing year, experts have not reached a full consensus on the primary cause of these extinctions. Some emphasize the role of rapid climate shifts which altered habitats and reduced available food. Others point to the increasing presence of humans whose hunting practices may have added pressure to already vulnerable populations. You stand quietly, letting these thoughts settle. There is no need to move closer, no need to examine further. The meaning is already clear. You turn slowly and begin to walk back toward the camp. The ground beneath your feet feels the same, firm and steady. The wind continues its quiet path across the land. The sky remains unchanged, and yet everything feels different now. You carry the awareness with you. The understanding that the changes you have been sensing are not just abstract shifts in temperature or moisture. They have real consequences, visible ones. When you return to the camp, the fire greets you once more. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads slowly, grounding you again in the present moment. Around you, others continue their quiet routines. Movements are steady, familiar, shaped by experience and necessity. But you notice something new. A glance exchanged, a brief pause in movement, a moment of stillness as if others too are sensing the deeper changes unfolding around them. A quieter point is that early human communities likely observe patterns of animal movement and decline, adjusting their strategies in response. Such observations would have been essential for survival, guiding decisions about where to travel and what resources to seek. You watch the fire, its flames rising and settling in a steady rhythm. The warmth feels reassuring, but it cannot change what is happening beyond its reach. You think again of the animals, their slow movements, their shrinking numbers, the quiet signs left behind in the land. You might wonder how long they will continue to exist in this world, whether future generations will know them as you do now, or only through traces. The answer is not clear. The cause remains uncertain, shaped by many factors interacting over time. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. There is no urgency in your thoughts, only a quiet reflection. The world is changing, not just in temperature, not just in landscape, but in the lives of the creatures that inhabit it. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing briefly before fading into the air. It is a simple moment, easy to overlook, and yet it carries a quiet meaning, a reminder that even the most powerful forms of life can fade, leaving only traces behind. You remain there listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the steady movement of the wind. And slowly, gently, you begin to understand that this period of change is shaping not only the land but the very fabric of life within it. You remain seated by the fire, your thoughts still resting on what you discovered out in the open land. The image of the fallen animal lingers quietly in your mind, not as something alarming, but as a gentle reminder that the world is shifting in ways that cannot be ignored. The fire crackles softly in front of you. Its warmth feels steady, familiar, something you can rely on. For a while you stay there letting the calm settle around you. Then slowly your attention turns to the people nearby. Their movements are quiet, deliberate, shaped by routines that have been practiced over many seasons. Someone adjusts a piece of clothing, pulling it closer against the cold. Another carefully arranges tools, placing each one in a position where it can be easily reached. You begin to notice how each action carries intention. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is done without purpose. You rise gently, moving a short distance away from the fire, but not as far as before. This time your focus is not on the distant land, but on the lives unfolding within this small circle of human presence. You observe how the shelters are arranged. Low structures built close to the ground using materials gathered from the surrounding environment. Branches, hides, grasses, all combined in ways that offer protection from wind and cold. It is broadly understood that early human groups during the late Ice Age relied on portable or semi-permanent shelters, allowing them to move as conditions changed. Flexibility was essential in a world where resources could shift from one place to another over time. You step closer to one of the shelters, running your hand lightly along its surface. The material feels rough but strong. It has been shaped with care. You imagine the effort it takes to build something like this. The gathering of materials, the knowledge of how to arrange them, the shared work required to create a space that offers even a small degree of comfort. You move back toward the fire where a few individuals are seated. Their voices are low, their expressions calm. There is no sign of urgency, no visible fear. Yet there is a quiet awareness in the way they interact, a sense that each moment is shaped by careful attention to the environment. A detail that often goes unnoticed is that early human communities likely relied heavily on shared knowledge, passing down information about weather patterns, animal behavior and survival techniques through observation and experience rather than written records. You sit down again listening. The conversation is soft, almost blending into the background sounds of the fire and wind. You cannot make out the exact words, but you can sense the rhythm of it. Calm, measured, steady. You might wonder how these people understand the changes taking place around them. They do not speak of climate systems or global patterns, but they observe. They notice when the air grows colder, when animals move differently, when water becomes less available. These observations shape their decisions in quiet, practical ways. You watch as someone rises and walks toward the edge of the camp, scanning the horizon briefly before returning. The movement is simple, but it reflects an awareness of the surroundings, a constant checking, a quiet monitoring of the world beyond. You follow with your eyes, then look outward yourself. The landscape remains still, cold, unchanged at first glance. But now you know better. Records from this era reveal that human survival depended not on controlling the environment, but on adapting to it. Movement flexibility and cooperation were key, especially during periods of rapid environmental change. You feel the weight of that idea settle gently in your mind. Adaptation, not resistance. You glance again at the fire. It continues to burn steadily, its warmth creating a small space of comfort within a larger, colder world. You extend your hands toward it, feeling the heat return. A small but telling sign is how closely everyone remains gathered around it. The space between individuals has narrowed not out of necessity alone, but as a natural response to the cold. You listen again. The wind moves through the camp, its tone steady and familiar. The fire responds with soft crackling. The distant world remains quiet. And within this quiet life continues. You begin to think about the choices these people must make. Where to go, when to move, what to gather. Each decision shaped by observation, by memory, by the subtle signals provided by the land. There is still no clear agreement among researchers on how quickly human groups adapted to sudden climate shifts, like the Younger Dryas. Some suggest that flexibility in movement allowed for relatively quick adjustments. Others believe that rapid changes may have created significant challenges, especially for groups already living close to survival limits. You sit a little more comfortably now, letting your body settle. The warmth of the fire reaches deeper, easing the tension in your shoulders. You watch as someone adds another piece of wood, carefully placing it so the flames continue to burn evenly. There is a rhythm here, a quiet balance between effort and rest, between awareness and calm. You might find yourself wondering how it feels to live in a world like this, where every detail matters, where survival depends on noticing even the smallest changes. And yet there is also a sense of peace here, a closeness to the environment, a connection that feels immediate and real. You look out once more across the landscape. The cold remains, the stillness holds, but within the camp there is warmth, there is cooperation, there is life continuing, adapting, adjusting. You settle into that awareness, letting it become part of your understanding. The changes you've been observing are not just shaping the land or the animals, they are shaping human behavior as well, quietly, steadily, guiding each small decision, each movement, each moment of attention. And as you sit there surrounded by the soft glow of firelight and the calm presence of those around you, you begin to understand that survival in this world is not about control. It is about listening, observing, and moving gently with the changes that cannot be stopped. You sit near the fire a little longer, letting its warmth ease into your body, while the cold settles quietly just beyond its reach. The rhythm here has become familiar. Warmth and chill, light and shadow, stillness and movement. After a while, you shift your weight and stand again. This time your attention turns not toward distant animals or wide landscapes, but toward something more immediate. The daily act of finding food, the quiet, ongoing effort that shapes every hour of life here. You move slowly away from the center of the camp, noticing how a few others begin to do the same. There's no announcement, no urgency, just a shared understanding of what needs to be done. You follow at a distance. The ground beneath your feet feels firm and dry each step, leaving only the faintest impression. The wind brushes lightly across your face, carrying with it that same cool clarity you have come to expect. As you walk, you begin to notice where attention is directed. Not randomly, but with purpose. Eyes scan the ground, hands move gently through grasses. Movements are careful, deliberate, shaped by experience. Findings indicate that early human groups relied heavily on foraging, gathering edible plants, roots, and seeds that could be found within their environment. Hunting played a role, but gathering often provided a more consistent source of food, especially in uncertain conditions. You pause and watch as one person kneels near a cluster of low plants. They examine it closely, touching the leaves, the stems, as if confirming something known through memory. Then, with careful movement, they gather a small portion, leaving the rest behind. Nothing is taken carelessly. You step closer, observing the ground. The plants here are sparse, their growth limited by the colder, drier conditions. They are smaller than what you might expect, their leaves narrow, their colour muted. A quieter observation is that in colder climates, many edible plants grow closer to the ground, conserving energy and protecting themselves from wind and frost. This makes them harder to find, requiring patience and knowledge. You crouch slightly, letting your eyes adjust to the details. It becomes clear that food is not abundant here. It is found. Piece by piece, you continue walking, following the gentle movement of the group. At times, they spread out slightly, covering more ground. Then they come together again, sharing what they have gathered. The process feels balanced, cooperative, shaped by a shared goal, rather than individual effort. You might wonder how much they know about the land they move through, how they remember where to look, how they recognize what is safe to eat. Evidence from this period shows that knowledge of edible plants was likely passed down through generations, forming an essential part of survival. This knowledge would include not only where to find food, but when it would be available and how to prepare it. You reach a slightly different patch of ground. Here the soil appears darker, holding a bit more moisture than the surrounding area. Small plants grow in clusters, their leaves slightly broader, their colour just a bit deeper. One person kneels and begins to dig gently. The movement is slow, careful, revealing something beneath the surface, a root, thick enough to provide nourishment, though not large. You watch as it is lifted from the soil, brushed clean and placed aside. A small but telling sign is how much effort goes into finding even a single piece of food. Nothing here is effortless. Every resource requires time, attention, and care. You stand again, looking across the land. The wide openness remains, but now it feels different. Not empty, but demanding. You begin to understand how the colder conditions have changed not only the landscape but the effort required to live within it. You follow as the group slowly makes its way back toward the camp. Their pace is steady, unhurried, but purposeful. There is no excess movement, no wasted energy. Each step feels measured. When you return, the fire is still burning. You sit down once more, placing your hands near the warmth. The gathered food is placed nearby, sorted quietly. There is no abundance, but there is enough. Enough to continue. Enough to sustain. Researchers continue to examine how shifts in climate affected food availability during this period. Some suggest that colder and drier conditions reduce plant diversity, making it more difficult to rely on consistent sources of nutrition. Others propose that human adaptability allowed for a wide range of strategies, including shifting diets and seasonal movement. You watch as small portions are prepared, nothing elaborate, just simple actions repeated with care. The smell is faint, earthy grounding. You take a slow breath, letting it settle. There is a quiet satisfaction in this moment, not comfort in the modern sense, but something deeper, a sense of continuity, of effort leading to survival. You might find yourself reflecting on how different this is from the way food is experienced today. How easily it is obtained, how little thought is required in comparison. Here every piece matters, every plant, every root, every decision. You settle deeper into your place, feeling the warmth spread through your body. The fire crackles softly, the wind moves steadily, the camp remains calm, and within this calm life continues, not easily, but steadily. You look out once more across the land. The cold still holds, the changes remain. But within this small circle of human presence there is resilience. Quiet, persistent. You begin to understand that survival here is not about overcoming the environment. It is about working within it, adapting to its rhythms, listening to its signals. And as you sit there surrounded by the soft glow of firelight and the steady presence of those around you, you feel that understanding settle gently into place. The world has changed, but life continues to find a way. You remain by the fire as the quiet rhythm of the camp continues around you. The soft crackle of burning wood blends with the steady movement of the wind, creating a calm, familiar sound that fills the space without demanding attention. For a while you simply sit. Your hands rest near the warmth, your thoughts moving slowly, gently, like the patterns of light shifting across the ground. Then after a time you begin to notice the small preparations taking place around you. Not large actions, not sudden changes, but quiet adjustments. Someone gathers additional pieces of wood and places them within easy reach of the fire. Another checks the edge of a shelter, pressing down a loose section to ensure it holds firm against the wind. A third person moves closer to the centre, adjusting their position to share warmth more effectively. You begin to understand that these small actions are not random. They are responses. Careful, thoughtful responses to the cold that has settled into the land. You stand slowly, drawn by a quiet curiosity. This time you move closer to one of the shelters, observing it more carefully than before. The structure is low and compact, built in a way that minimizes exposure to the wind. The materials are layered, overlapping in a pattern that traps warmth while blocking the cold air from entering. Studies point to the idea that early humans developed a range of shelter designs suited to their environments, using available materials such as animal hides, wood, and grasses to create spaces that provided insulation and protection. You reach out and press gently against the surface. It holds firm. The structure feels sturdy though simple. You step back looking at how it sits within the landscape, close to the ground, shielded from direct wind, positioned near the fire. Everything about it reflects careful thought. A detail many people overlook is that insulation, even in its simplest forms, can make a significant difference in survival. Layers of material trap pockets of air, slowing the loss of heat and creating a more stable internal environment. You move back toward the fire where others are gathered. Your attention shifts to how they position themselves. No one sits too far from the warmth. No one wastes energy moving unnecessarily. Each person seems to understand instinctively how to conserve heat. You sit again, extending your hands toward the flames. The warmth spreads slowly, moving from your fingers to your palms, then deeper into your body. You notice how your breathing is adjusted, slightly slower, slightly more measured, as if your body, like the world around you, is adapting. You might find yourself wondering how much of this knowledge is learned and how much is instinct. How do people come to understand the best ways to stay warm, to protect themselves, to endure? Evidence from this period suggests that knowledge of survival techniques was shared within groups passed down through observation and experience. Over time, these practices would become refined, forming a quiet foundation for daily life. You glance toward the fire again. Someone adds another piece of wood, placing it carefully so the flames continue to burn evenly. The movement is precise, controlled, reflecting an understanding of how the fire behaves. Fire is not just warmth. It is protection. It is light. It is life. A small but telling sign is how consistently the fire is maintained. It is never allowed to weaken too much, never left unattended. Its presence is central, anchoring the camp in both physical and emotional ways. You listen as the fire crackles softly. The sound is steady, reassuring. The wind continues its quiet movement beyond the circle of light. You might notice how the cold feels less overwhelming when you remain close to the fire, how the body adjusts, finding comfort in this small space. But you also understand that this comfort is temporary. Step away and the cold returns. The balance is constant. Care must be taken. Energy must be conserved. Researchers continue to examine how early humans managed energy use in cold environments. Some suggest that minimizing movement and staying close together helped reduce heat loss. Others point to the importance of clothing shelter design and fire management as key factors in survival. You shift slightly, settling more comfortably. The warmth reaches deeper now, easing the tension in your shoulders. You glance around the camp. Everyone remains calm, focused. There is no sense of struggle, no visible strain, just quiet adaptation. You begin to understand that survival here is not dramatic. It is not a constant battle. It is a series of small, thoughtful actions repeated over time, each one contributing to stability, each one reducing risk. You might compare this briefly to modern life. Today, warmth is often immediate, controlled with the press of a button. Shelter is solid, insulated, predictable. Here nothing is guaranteed. Everything must be maintained. Everything must be understood. You let that thought settle, then release it, returning your focus to the present. The fire, the warmth, the steady rhythm of the camp. You watch as a small spark rises from the flames, glowing softly before fading into the air. It is a simple moment, quiet, unremarkable at first glance, and yet it reflects something deeper. The delicate balance between warmth and cold, between effort and survival. You remain there, listening, observing, and slowly absorbing the quiet knowledge that surrounds you. The world has changed, the cold has returned, but within this small circle of light and warmth, life continues, carefully, deliberately, and with a quiet resilience that does not demand attention, but reveals itself in every small, thoughtful action. You sit quietly by the fire, letting its warmth settle deep into your body while your thoughts drift beyond the camp once more. The cold has become familiar now, no longer surprising, but always present, shaping the way you move, the way you rest, the way you think. After a while you rise again. This time your attention turns toward movement. Not the slow movement of wind or water, but the movement of people. The quiet decision to leave, even if only for a time. You notice how a small group begins to prepare. There is no announcement, no signal that marks the moment, just a series of small actions. A tool gathered, a piece of clothing adjusted, a glance exchanged. Then slowly they begin to move. You follow at a distance, your steps soft against the firm ground. The land stretches out ahead, open and quiet. The wind moves steadily, brushing across your face with its familiar chill. Each breath feels clean and sharp, settling lightly in your chest. As you walk, you begin to understand. This is not wandering. This is movement with purpose. Archaeological findings reveal that early human groups were highly mobile, often moving across large distances in response to changing environmental conditions. When resources became scarce in one area, they would travel to another, following patterns shaped by experience and necessity. You continue walking, keeping your distance as the group moves across the landscape. Their pace is steady, unhurried, but deliberate. They do not waste energy. Each step feels measured, each direction chosen with care. You might wonder how they decide where to go. There are no maps, no markers, and yet there is knowledge, passed through memory, through observation, through countless small experiences that build into an understanding of the land. You notice how they move along a path that is not clearly defined, yet feels familiar. Slight rises in the ground, subtle changes in vegetation, the faint outline of a route that has been used before. A rarely mentioned detail is that repeated movement across the same terrain can create invisible pathways, remembered not by physical signs but by patterns stored in the mind. You follow as they crest a gentle rise. From here the land opens up again, revealing a wider view. The landscape remains cold, firm and quiet, but there are differences. In the distance you can see areas where the ground appears slightly more varied, where patches of vegetation gather more closely together. The group adjusts its direction, slightly moving toward that area. You begin to see the pattern. Movement is guided by possibility, by small signs of life, by the chance of finding what is needed. You walk a little farther, feeling the steady rhythm of your steps. The wind continues its quiet path. The sky remains pale and open. Everything feels calm yet purposeful. You might find yourself reflecting on how different this is from modern travel. Today movement is fast-directed, often disconnected from the land itself. Here every step's connected, every movement matters. You pause briefly, watching as the group slows. They spread out slightly, scanning the ground, the horizon, the subtle details that might reveal something useful. Current research shows that mobility was a key survival strategy during periods of environmental instability. By moving early, humans could reduce pressure on local resources and increase their chances of finding food and shelter. You notice how the group communicates, not through loud calls or dramatic gestures, but through small movements. A hand signal, a shift in direction, a pause that others understand without words. It feels quiet, efficient, connected. You continue to follow your steps steady. After some time, the group begins to turn back. The exploration is complete, at least for now. They carry with them what they have found, though it is not much. Still it is enough to continue, enough to sustain. You walk with them as they return to the camp. The familiar shapes come into view slowly. The fire, the shelters, the quiet centre of activity that provides warmth and stability. As you approach, the fire stands out against the colder tones of the landscape. You sit down once more, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads slowly, easing the chill that has settled into your body. You watch as the group shares what they have gathered. There is no display, no celebration, just quiet distribution. A practical sharing of resources. An easily overlooked sign is how cooperation plays a central role in survival. Sharing ensures that no single individual carries too much risk, allowing the group as a whole to remain stable. You listen as the fire crackles softly. The wind continues its steady movement beyond the camp. The world remains calm yet changed. You might wonder how far these groups travel over time, how often they move, how they decide when to stay and when to leave. The answer is not simple. The picture remains incomplete, shaped by many factors that vary from place to place and from moment to moment. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. The warmth feels grounding, reliable, a constant in a world that continues to shift. You look out once more across the land. The cold remains, the stillness holds, but within this stillness there is movement. Quiet, purposeful, essential. You begin to understand that survival here is not just about enduring the environment. It is about knowing when to move, when to stay, when to follow the subtle signals that guide each step. And as you sit there watching the fire and listening to the wind, you feel that understanding settle gently into place. The land is not static. It is a guide. And those who listen carefully can move with it, adapting to its changes, finding their place within its quiet, shifting rhythms. You sit close to the fire, letting the warmth settle gently into your hands while your thoughts drift beyond the camp once again. The steady rhythm of the flames feels familiar now, almost like a quiet companion that never leaves. After some time you rise. This time your attention turns toward the distant horizon where the land seems to stretch endlessly. There is something about that far edge that draws you a quiet curiosity about what lies beyond what you can see. You step away from the fire and begin to walk. The ground beneath your feet remains firm, holding each step with a quiet certainty. The air carries its usual chill, brushing lightly against your face, clear and steady. As you move farther from the camp, the landscape begins to open in a different way. You notice subtle changes in the terrain. The land slopes gently downward in the distance, and there is a faint sense that something lies there, something lower, something once filled with life. You continue walking until you reach the edge of a wide, shallow depression. It stretches out before you, vast and quiet. At first glance, it appears empty. But as you look more closely, you begin to notice the details. The ground here is smoother, more compacted, as if shaped by something that once moved across it. The soil carries a slightly different colour, hinting at a past that is no longer visible. You stand still, letting the scene settle into your awareness. This place feels different, not just empty but changed. Data from this era suggests that as ice sheets melted, sea levels began to rise, gradually flooding coastal regions and low-lying landscapes. Areas that were once dry land became submerged, altering the shape of continents and the paths available to both animals and humans. You imagine what this place might have looked like before. Perhaps a wide plain, perhaps a pathway used by migrating animals, perhaps even a place where people once walked, gathered, lived. Now it is quiet, still, a space that feels like it is waiting even though it has already changed. You take a few steps forward, your feet pressing into the ground. It feels different here. More compact, more settled. A small but telling sign is that land exposed to water over long periods often becomes smoother and more compressed, leaving subtle traces even after the water has receded. You crouch down, running your hand lightly across the surface. The texture is firm, almost polished in places. You lift your hand and look out again. The horizon beyond this depression seems slightly lower, as if the land itself has been reshaped. You might find yourself wondering how many places like this exist. How many landscapes have changed in ways that are not immediately visible? How many paths have been lost beneath rising waters? There is still no single agreed explanation for how quickly sea levels rose during this period. Some evidence suggests gradual increases, while other findings point to episodes of more rapid change, where large amounts of water entered the oceans over shorter spans of time. You stand again and begin to walk along the edge of the depression. The wind moves steadily across the open space. It sounds slightly different here, more open, less interrupted by vegetation or uneven ground. It carries a faint echo, a subtle shift in tone that reflects the shape of the land. You pause and listen. It is quiet, but not empty. There is a presence here not of life, but of history, of something that once was. You begin to make your way back toward the camp. As you walk, the familiar patterns return. The firm ground, the muted grasses, the steady wind, and yet your perspective has changed. You now carry the awareness that the land itself is not permanent, that it can shift, reshape, disappear. Archaeological findings reveal that many ancient human migration routes were likely affected by rising sea levels, with some paths becoming submerged and others emerging as new landscapes formed. You approach the camp once more. The fire stands out clearly, its warm glow contrasting against the cooler tones of the surrounding land. You sit down, extending your hands toward the heat. The warmth spreads slowly, grounding you again. Around you, the quiet routines continue. People move calmly, tending to tasks, adjusting to the environment in ways that feel natural and unforced. You glance once more toward the direction of the distant depression. It is no longer visible from here, but you know it is there. A reminder, a trace of change. An easily overlooked sign is how much of Earth's history is hidden beneath layers of transformation visible only through careful observation or long passage of time. You listen to the fire. The crackle is steady. The wind continues its quiet movement. The world remains calm yet altered. You might wonder how future generations will understand these changes, whether they will see the land as it is now or uncover the traces of what came before. The question remains open, the answers shaped by time waiting to be discovered. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. The warmth feels steady. The cold remains beyond it. And within this balance, you begin to understand that the changes shaping this world are not only happening in the present, they are leaving marks, subtle, enduring, waiting for someone somewhere to notice them. And as you sit there watching the flames and listening to the wind, you feel that awareness settle gently into place. The land remembers, even when it appears still. You sit quietly after returning from the open land, your thoughts still lingering on the smooth, quiet depression you explored. The fire burns steadily in front of you, its warmth grounding you in the present, yet your mind continues to drift toward the idea of places that once existed and are now gone. After some time you rise again. This time your steps feel slower, more reflective. You move away from the fire and begin walking in a different direction, guided by a quiet curiosity. The ground beneath your feet remains firm, the air cool and steady, the wind moving with its familiar measured rhythm. As you walk, the landscape unfolds in subtle layers. Low grasses stretch outward. Small rises and dips shape the terrain. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, and yet you begin to notice something new. The land ahead narrows slightly, forming a gentle passage between two higher stretches of ground. It feels almost like a path, though not one marked by obvious signs. You step into it. The wind softens here, shielded slightly by the surrounding land. The air feels stiller, more contained. Your footsteps echo faintly against the compacted ground. You walk slowly, letting your senses adjust. There is a feeling here, a sense that this place once held greater importance than it does now. You pause and look around. The shape of the land suggests movement. Not random movement, but repeated passage. A route, a connection. Findings indicate that during the late Ice Age, land bridges connected regions that are now separated by water. These pathways allowed animals and humans to move between continents, following migration routes shaped by climate and geography. You continue walking through the narrow passage. The ground feels smoother here, more worn, as if many feet once passed along this way over long periods of time. You imagine what it might have been like. Animals moving in large groups. Humans following, observing, adapting. A steady flow of life moving across the land. Now it is quiet, still, a path without travellers. You step forward carefully, your eyes scanning the edges of the passage. There are small signs, subtle, a slight difference in the soil, a pattern in the way the grasses grow, a quiet indication that this place once served a purpose. A small but telling sign is that ancient migration routes often leave faint traces in the landscape, even after the conditions that created them have changed. You reach the end of the passage and step out onto open ground once more. The wind returns, brushing across your face with its steady chill. You turn and look back. The narrow stretch of land blends into the surroundings, its significance not immediately obvious. You might find yourself wondering how many such paths once existed. How many connections between places have been lost as the earth changed? There is still no single agreed explanation for how quickly some of these land bridges disappeared. Some evidence points to gradual flooding as sea levels rose. Other findings suggest periods of more rapid change where large areas were submerged within shorter spans of time. You begin to walk back toward the camp. Your steps are steady, your thoughts calm. As you move, the familiar patterns of the landscape return. The firm ground, the muted grasses, the steady wind, But now each of these feels connected to a larger story. A story of movement, of connection, of change. You approach the camp once more. The fire stands out clearly, its warm glow steady against the cooler tones of the land. You sit down, extending your hands toward the heat. The warmth spreads slowly, easing the chill from your fingers. Around you, the quiet routines continue. People move calmly, tending to tasks, maintaining the balance that allows life to continue in this environment. You glance once more toward the direction you came from. The narrow passage is no longer visible from here, but you know it is there, a quiet trace of a connection that once mattered. Archaeological findings reveal that the disappearance of land bridges played a significant role in shaping human migration patterns, isolating populations and influencing the development of cultures over time. You listen to the fire crackle softly. The wind continues its steady movement. The world remains calm yet altered. You might reflect on how different this is from modern life, where connections between places are maintained through technology, where movement is fast and often effortless. Here connection depends on the land itself, on pathways that can appear and disappear, on conditions that are never fully stable. An easily overlooked sign is how much of human history has been shaped by geography, by the availability or loss of routes that allowed people to move and interact. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. The warmth feels steady, the cold remains beyond it. And within this balance, you begin to understand something deeper. The changes shaping this world are not only affecting the present moment, they are altering connections, changing paths, redefining how life moves across the earth. You watch as the flames rise and fall, their light steady and calming, and as you sit there listening to the wind and feeling the warmth of the fire, you begin to sense that these lost pathways are part of a larger transformation, one that is quietly reshaping the world one connection at a time. You sit quietly by the fire, the steady glow reflecting softly across your hands while your thoughts drift through the places you have walked. The smooth depression in the land, the narrow passage that once guided movement, the quiet traces left behind by a world in transition. The fire crackles gently. The wind continues its steady path beyond the circle of warmth. Everything feels calm, yet your understanding of this place has deepened. After some time, you lean back slightly, your gaze lifting toward the open sky. It stretches wide above you, pale and still, offering no immediate answers. And yet you begin to wonder how the people here make sense of what they experience. Not in scientific terms, but in memory, in stories. You rise slowly and step a short distance away from the fire, your movements unhurried. The cold air meets you with its familiar presence settling lightly against your skin. You look out across the landscape. It remains unchanged at first glance. But you know now that beneath that stillness lies a history of change, of shifting paths and disappearing lands. You begin to imagine how these changes are understood by those who live here. They do not measure time in numbers. They do not record events in written form. But they remember, they observe, they share. Evidence preserved in the archaeological record shows that early human communities relied on oral traditions to pass down knowledge across generations. Stories, gestures and repeated experiences formed a living memory that helped guide future decisions. You take a few steps forward, letting the quiet settle around you. You imagine sitting near the fire listening as someone speaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, but calmly, describing a place where the land once stretched farther, a path that once existed, a time when animals were more plentiful. These are not just stories, they are records, encoded in memory, passed carefully from one person to another. A faint clue lies in the consistency of certain themes found across ancient cultures, where stories of changing landscapes, shifting waters and lost lands appear in different forms. These patterns suggest that real events may have been remembered and shared long after they occurred. You stand still, letting that thought settle, the idea that memory can carry history even without written words. You turn your gaze toward the horizon again. It feels different now. Not just a distant line, but a boundary between what is known and what has been forgotten. You might wonder how accurately these memories reflect what truly happened, whether details are preserved or slowly altered over time. Interpretations differ among researchers on this question. Some believe that oral traditions can retain remarkable accuracy over long periods, especially when tied to survival knowledge. Others suggest that stories naturally evolve, blending observation with interpretation. You walk slowly back toward the camp. As you approach, the fire comes into view once more, its warm light steady and familiar. The people gathered around it move with quiet ease, their actions shaped by routine and shared understanding. You sit down again, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads slowly, grounding you. You listen, the soft murmur of voices, the crackle of wood, the steady movement of wind. You imagine how knowledge is shared here, not through instruction alone, but through experience, through watching, through doing. A quiet indicator of this is how younger members of the group remain close, observing the actions of others, learning without formal teaching. Every movement becomes a lesson, every decision a guide. You glance at the faces around you, calm, focused, connected. You begin to understand that survival here is not just physical, it is also mental, cultural, a matter of memory. You might reflect on how different this is from modern life, where information is stored externally, written down, recorded, easily accessed. Here, knowledge lives within people. It must be remembered, protected, shared. The full explanation remains unresolved when it comes to how much of early human memory reflects specific environmental events. Yet the presence of recurring themes across distant regions suggests that important changes were not forgotten easily. You sit a little more comfortably, letting the warmth reach deeper into your body. The fire continues its steady rhythm. The wind moves quietly beyond. The world remains calm, and within that calm memory carries meaning. You think again of the places you've seen, the smooth land that may once have held water, the narrow passage that once guided movement. These are not just physical spaces. They are stories, waiting to be told. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing briefly before fading into the air. It reminds you of something, how even the smallest moment can leave a trace, a memory, a story. You remain there, listening, observing, and slowly absorbing the quiet connection between past and present. The land changes, the paths disappear, but memory continues, carried from one person to another, from one generation to the next. And as you sit there surrounded by the soft glow of firelight and the steady presence of those around you, you begin to understand that these changes are not only shaping the world, they are shaping how the world is remembered. You sit quietly by the fire, your thoughts resting gently on the idea of memory of stories carried through time. The warmth reaches your hands, steady and reassuring, while the cold remains just beyond, patient and unchanged. For a while everything feels settled. The wind moves in its familiar way. The fire crackles softly. The people around you continue their calm routines, each movement deliberate, each action shaped by experience. Then slowly something begins to shift again. At first it is subtle, so subtle that you almost miss it. You lift your head slightly, taking a slow breath. The air feels different, not warmer in any obvious sense, but less sharp, less rigid, as if something has softened just beneath the surface. You stand your curiosity, gently pulling you outward once more. The ground beneath your feet still feels firm, but as you walk you begin to notice small variations. In certain places the surface gives slightly more than before, as if the tight hold of the cold has loosened just a little. You pause and look across the landscape. The grasses remain muted, the sky still pale, the wind steady. Yet there is a quiet sense that the world is beginning to shift again, this time in a different direction. Current understanding points to the fact that the Younger Dryas did not last forever. Around 11,700 years ago, temperatures began to rise once more, marking the end of this cold period and the beginning of a more stable climate phase. You take another slow breath. The air carries a faint softness, barely noticeable but present. You begin to walk toward the stream you visited before. As you approach, you notice it first in the sound. The water seems slightly more active, its surface showing small ripples that were not as visible before. The edges of the stream appear less rigid, the surrounding ground holding a touch more moisture. You crouch beside it, watching carefully. You do not rush. You simply observe, A subtle trace can be seen in how water responds to temperature changes. As conditions warm, even slightly ice loosens, flow increases, and the landscape begins to soften in small but meaningful ways. You extend your hand and touch the surface. It is still cold, but not as biting, not as sharp. You withdraw your hand, slowly watching the droplets fall back into the stream. You stand again, your gaze moving outward. The land still appears much as it did before, but now you're attuned to the smallest details. The slight give in the soil, the faint increase in movement, the barely visible shift in tone. You might wonder how long it takes for such changes to become fully visible. How long before the land itself begins to transform again? There is no definitive answer yet. Some evidence suggests that the transition out of the Younger Dryas may have occurred relatively quickly, perhaps within a few decades. Other findings point to a more gradual process unfolding over longer periods depending on the region. You begin to walk back toward the camp, your steps steady. As you move, the wind brushes across your face once more. It still carries a chill, but there is something else within it now, a faint hint of softness, a suggestion of change. When you reach the camp, the fire is still burning steadily. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads slowly, familiar and grounding. Around you, the quiet routines continue. People move calmly, tending to tasks, maintaining the rhythm that has sustained them through the colder period. But if you watch closely, there are small differences. A piece of clothing adjusted slightly less tightly, a moment spent a little farther from the fire, a brief glance outward as if noticing something new. A quiet indicator of this shift is how behavior begins to change even before the environment transforms fully. Small adjustments reflect subtle awareness long before larger patterns become clear. You listen, the fire crackles softly, the wind moves gently, the distant world remains calm, and yet the direction has changed. The cold is no longer deepening. It is easing, slowly, quietly. You might reflect on how this mirrors the earlier shift when warmth gave way to sudden cold. But this time the change feels different, less abrupt, more gradual, more like a steady return. Researchers continue to explore the exact causes behind this transition. Some suggest that ocean circulation resumed its previous patterns, allowing warmth to return to northern regions. Others point to broader climatic adjustments involving the atmosphere and solar energy. You sit quietly, letting these ideas settle. There is no need to resolve them, only to observe, to feel, to notice. The fire flickers gently in front of you. Its warmth remains constant even as the world beyond begins to shift once more. You look out across the landscape. The cold still holds, but not as firmly. The stillness remains, but it feels lighter, as if the land itself is beginning to breathe again. You settle deeper into your place, your body relaxing slightly. The tension that came with the deeper cold has eased just a little. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing softly before fading into the air. It feels different now. Not just a moment of light, but a quiet signal. A sign that change once again is unfolding. And as you sit there surrounded by the gentle warmth of the fire and the steady presence of the camp, you begin to understand that the long cold chapter is nearing its end. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, gently, like the first hint of warmth returning to a world that has waited a very long time. You sit near the fire, feeling its warmth settle into your hands as a quiet sense of change lingers in the air around you. The cold has not disappeared, but it feels less absolute now, less defining. It no longer presses against everything with the same steady force. For a while you remain still. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves with a gentler touch. The land beyond the camp holds its familiar shape, yet something within it feels lighter. You take a slow breath. The air carries a subtle difference. Not warmth exactly, but a softness that was not there before. After some time you rise again. You step away from the fire and begin to walk your movements calm and unhurried. The ground beneath your feet feels slightly different. Still firm, but with moments where it yields just a little more, as if the tight hold of the cold is gradually loosening. As you move farther from the camp, your attention sharpens. You begin to notice small signs. Not dramatic, not immediate, but present, a patch of grass that appears slightly fuller, a hint of green that stands out against the muted tones, a subtle variation in texture where the soil holds a touch more moisture. Scientific analysis indicates that the end of the Younger Dryas marked the beginning of the Holocene, a period of relatively stable and warmer climate that continues to the present day. This transition allowed ecosystems to expand and diversify, creating conditions more favourable for sustained plant and animal life. You pause and look closely at the ground. The change is not widespread yet, but it is there. You crouch slightly, letting your fingers brush lightly against the surface. The soil feels softer, not dramatically so, but enough to notice. You lift your hand and observe the faint traces left behind, a subtle sign that the land is beginning to respond. You stand again, your gaze moving outward. The landscape still carries the memory of cold, but it no longer feels fixed in that state. There is a quiet sense of movement, of possibility, of something unfolding beneath the surface. You begin to walk toward the stream. As you approach, the sound reaches you first. It is clearer now, more active. The water moves with a gentle energy, its surface catching the pale light in small shifting patterns. You kneel beside it and watch. The edges appear less rigid, the surrounding ground slightly darker with moisture. The flow feels more consistent, less restrained. A faint clue lies in how water systems respond quickly to temperature changes. Increased flow often signals the release of ice and the return of more dynamic movement across the landscape. You dip your hand into the stream. The water is still cold, but it no longer carries that sharp, biting edge. It feels more balanced. You withdraw your hand, slowly letting the droplets fall. You sit back for a moment, simply observing. The sound of water, the movement of light, the quiet shift in the air. You might wonder how long it will take for the land to fully transform. How long before the muted tones give way to richer colours? Before the stillness becomes something more active? There is no definitive answer yet. Some regions likely experienced rapid changes while others transitioned more slowly, shaped by local conditions and geography. You stand again and begin to walk back toward the camp. As you move, the wind brushes across your face. It still carries a coolness, but it feels lighter, less heavy, more open. When you reach the camp, the fire greets you once more. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads slowly, familiar and steady. Around you, the quiet routines continue, but there are small differences, subtle shifts in behaviour. Someone sits slightly farther from the fire than before. Another adjusts their clothing less tightly. A brief pause as someone looks out across the land as if noticing something new. An easily overlooked sign is how human behaviour often reflects environmental change before it becomes visually obvious. Small adjustments signal awareness even when the full transformation is still unfolding. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves gently. The distant world remains calm, and yet the direction has changed. The cold is no longer deepening. It is easing. You might reflect on how this moment feels. Not dramatic, not sudden, but meaningful. A quiet turning point. The end of one phase. The beginning of another. Ongoing studies continue to explore the mechanisms behind this transition. Some point to the resumption of ocean currents that distribute heat more effectively. Others suggest a combination of atmospheric and solar factors that gradually restored balance. You sit quietly, letting these ideas drift through your mind. There is no need to resolve them, only to observe, to feel, to notice. The fire flickers gently in front of you. Its warmth remains constant, but now it is no longer the only source of comfort. The world beyond it is beginning to soften. You look out across the landscape once more. The land still holds traces of cold, but beneath it something new is emerging. Life, movement, possibility. You settle deeper into your place, your body relaxing slightly. The tension has eased. The balance has shifted, and as you sit there surrounded by the quiet presence of the camp and the gentle signs of change unfolding around you, you begin to understand that this is the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped not by cold and restraint but by gradual renewal. You sit near the fire, though you notice you do not need to lean as close as before. The The warmth is still comforting, still welcome, but the air beyond it feels less demanding. The cold no longer presses in with the same quiet insistence. For a while you remain still, letting this subtle shift settle into your awareness. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves gently across the camp, and somewhere beyond the land is beginning to change. You rise slowly and step away from the circle of warmth. The ground beneath your feet feels different again. Still firm in places, but now there are patches where it yields slightly, holding your footprint for a moment before settling back. You walk outward, your pace calm and unhurried. As you move, your eyes begin to notice something new. Colour. Not bright, not overwhelming, but present. A faint green spreads across small areas of the landscape, more visible now than before. The grasses appear slightly fuller, their movement softer in the wind. You pause and look closely. The change is subtle but undeniable. Long-term data indicates that as the climate stabilized at the start of the Holocene plant, life expanded into regions that had previously been too cold or dry. This expansion created more complex ecosystems supporting a wider range of species. You take a few steps forward and crouch slightly. The soil feels different beneath your fingers, not just softer but richer. There is a faint sense of life within it, a quiet energy that was not as present before. You lift your hand and brush the soil away, watching as small particles fall. A quiet detail emerges when you look closer at how vegetation returns. Early growth often appears in small clusters, gradually spreading outward as conditions improve rather than transforming the entire landscape at once. You stand again and continue walking. The wind brushes lightly against your face, but now it carries a different quality. It feels less sharp, more balanced. There is even a faint hint of moisture in it, barely noticeable, but enough to soften the air. You follow a gentle slope downward and find yourself near the stream once more. The sound reaches you clearly. It is stronger now, more active. The water moves with a steady flow, its surface alive with small ripples that catch the light. You kneel beside it and watch. The edges have softened. The surrounding ground is darker, holding more moisture. The plants nearby appear slightly more vibrant, their leaves fuller, their presence more confident. You dip your hand into the water. It is still cool, but no longer harsh. It feels almost refreshing. You withdraw your hand slowly, letting the droplets fall back into the stream. You sit for a moment simply observing. The sound of water, the movement of light, the quiet return of life. You might wonder how quickly this transformation will spread. How long before the land becomes something entirely different from what it was? The exact pace of these changes is still being actively studied. Some regions appear to have responded rapidly to warming, while others change more gradually, influenced by local geography and climate patterns. You stand again and begin to walk back toward the camp. As you move, you notice more signs, small clusters of plants, slight variations in colour, a sense that the land is becoming more varied, more alive. When you reach the camp, the fire remains steady, but the way people gather around it has shifted. There is a little more space between them now. Not much, but noticeable. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth, though you find you do not need it as much. The heat spreads gently, but the air beyond it feels less harsh. Around you, movements continue, calm, measured, but lighter. Someone adjusts their position, sitting slightly farther from the fire than before. Another stands for a moment, looking out across the landscape as if noticing the same subtle changes you have seen. A small trace of this shift appears in behaviour. As conditions improve, the need for constant closeness to warmth decreases, allowing for more movement and flexibility within daily life. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves with a gentler tone. The distant world feels different. Not dramatically, but steadily. You might reflect on how this moment feels compared to the earlier cold. There is less tension, less constraint, a quiet sense of ease beginning to return. No single theory explains every detail of how ecosystems recovered during this transition. Multiple factors likely played a role, including temperature, moisture, and the gradual re-establishment of stable climate patterns. You sit a little more comfortably, letting your body relax. The warmth of the fire is still there, but now it is part of a larger comfort. The environment itself is beginning to soften. You look out across the landscape once more. The faint green patches, the flowing water, the gentle movement of air. Life is returning, slowly, quietly, but with a steady persistence. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing softly before fading into the air. It feels different now, not just a moment of light in the cold, but part of a world that is beginning to warm again. And as you sit there surrounded by the soft glow of firelight and the gentle signs of renewal, you begin to understand that the long period of cold has given way to something new. A quieter phase, a more stable world. One where life can begin to grow again. You sit near the fire, though now it feels less like a necessity and more like a quiet comfort. The warmth is still welcome, but the air beyond it no longer carries the same persistent chill. It feels balanced, as if the world has eased into a gentler state. For a while you remain still, letting the calm settle around you. The fire crackles softly, the wind moves with a lighter touch. The land beyond the camp holds a quiet promise of change. After some time you rise again. This time your attention turns toward the camp itself. Not the environment beyond, but the way life within this small group is beginning to shift. You take a few slow steps, observing more closely. The shelters remain where they are low and carefully constructed. But there is a subtle difference in how they are used. The openings seem less tightly sealed, the edges less reinforced. It's generally accepted that as climates became more stable and less harsh, early human groups could afford to spend longer periods in one place. Mobility remained important, but the need to constantly move in response to extreme conditions began to lessen. You move closer to one of the shelters, noticing how items are arranged nearby. Tools, materials, small gathered resources. They are placed with care, but there is a sense of continuity now, as if these objects are expected to remain here for more than a short time. You reach out and lightly touch the surface of a shelter. It still feels sturdy, but there is less urgency in its construction, less tension in its design. You step back and look across the camp. People move calmly, their actions steady, but there is a subtle shift in rhythm. Less constant adjustment, more moments of pause. A quieter aspect of this transition is how stability in the environment allows for longer periods of rest and routine. When conditions are less extreme, energy can be spent in different ways, not just on immediate survival. You walk slowly toward the edge of the camp, your gaze moving outward. The landscape reflects what you have already begun to notice. More variation, more life. Small clusters of vegetation appear in greater numbers. The ground shows more signs of softness. The air carries a faint hint of moisture. You might wonder how these changes influence decisions. When to stay, when to move, how long a place can sustain a group. Research across multiple regions shows that during the early Holocene, human groups began to experiment with longer stays in favourable locations, especially near reliable water sources and areas with abundant plant life. You turn back toward the camp. The fire remains at its centre, but it no longer feels like the only source of stability. The environment itself is beginning to provide more support. You sit down again, though this time you do not lean as close to the flames. The warmth reaches you easily. The air around you feels comfortable. You watch as someone takes a few steps away from the fire, spending time organising tools without immediately returning to the warmth. Another moves toward the edge of the camp, pausing to look out across the land before continuing their task. A small trace of this change appears in how space is used. As conditions improve, people begin to spread out slightly, using more of the environment rather than clustering tightly around a single source of warmth. You listen. The fire crackles. The wind moves gently. The sounds of the camp feel more open, less contained. You might reflect on how this shift affects not just survival, but daily experience. There is more room, more time, more possibility. The exact process by which human groups transitioned from constant movement to more settled patterns is still being actively studied. Some evidence suggests gradual changes influenced by local conditions, while other findings point to periods of more rapid adjustment. You sit a little more comfortably, letting your body relax. The tension that once defined each moment has eased. The need to constantly respond to cold has lessened. You look out across the landscape once more. The faint green patches have grown slightly more visible. The stream flows steadily. The air feels balanced. You begin to understand that this is not just a temporary change. It is a shift in the way life is experienced, not just enduring, but beginning to settle. You watch as a small group gathers near the edge of the camp, their movements calm, their conversation quiet. There is no urgency, no immediate need to move or adjust, just presence, a moment of stillness. Something rarely emphasized is how important stability is in shaping human behavior. When the environment becomes more predictable, it allows for new patterns to emerge, including longer stays and more consistent routines. You let that thought settle gently. The fire flickers in front of you, its light steady and warm, but now it is part of a larger sense of comfort. The world itself is becoming more supportive. You feel it in the air, in the ground, in the rhythm of movement around you. And as you sit there surrounded by the quiet presence of the camp and the gentle signs of change unfolding across the land, you begin to understand that this moment marks the beginning of something new. A shift not only in climate, but in how humans live within it, a slow movement toward stability, toward longer presence, toward a deeper connection with place. You sit quietly feeling the steady warmth of the fire, though now it feels less like a necessity and more like a gentle companion. The air around you has softened, and the land beyond the camp no longer feels as restrained as it once did. For a while you simply observe the movements around you, the subtle changes in behavior, the quiet expansion of space between people as the need for constant warmth fades. Then slowly your attention shifts again, this time toward something even more subtle. You rise and step away from the fire, walking toward the edge of the camp, where the ground feels slightly softer beneath your feet. The wind brushes gently against your face, carrying a faint hint of moisture that lingers in the air. You move slowly, your gaze focused on the ground. At first it seems unchanged, but then you notice something. Small clusters of plants growing in a more deliberate pattern, not scattered randomly, but grouped. You crouch down, studying them more closely. The plants are simple, their leaves small, their structure modest, but there is something different about their placement, as if they are not entirely left to chance. You reach out and touch one lightly. The soil around it feels slightly disturbed. Recently, current understanding points to the idea that during the early Holocene humans may have begun to influence plant growth in subtle ways. Not full agriculture, as we know it today, but small actions such as clearing areas, dispersing seeds, or encouraging certain plants to grow near camps. You sit back slightly, letting that idea settle. The possibility that people here are not just gathering from the land, but beginning to shape it. You look around. The pattern becomes more noticeable. Certain plants appear more frequently near the camp. Others are absent. A gentle sign of this shift is how useful plants tend to appear closer to areas of human activity, suggesting early forms of environmental management rather than purely natural distribution. You stand and walk a few steps farther. The ground shows faint signs of disturbance. Not large, not obvious, but present. A slight unevenness. A difference in texture, as if the surface has been moved and then settled again. You might wonder how intentional this is, whether these actions are deliberate or simply the result of repeated use of the same space. The exact mechanism is still not fully understood. Some researchers suggest that early plant management began unintentionally as people discarded seeds or disturbed soil. Others propose that these actions became more deliberate over time as patterns were observed and repeated. You take a slow breath, letting the air settle in your chest. It feels balanced, comfortable. You begin to walk back toward the camp. As you approach, you notice how people move within the space. There is more variation now, more movement away from the fire, more time spent in different areas. Someone kneels near the edge of the camp, interacting with the ground in a way that feels purposeful. Another carries small gathered items and places them in a consistent location, as if organizing them for later use. A quiet detail emerges when you observe how repeated actions begin to shape space. Areas near the camp become more defined, not through construction alone, but through consistent use. You sit down again, though this time you choose a spot slightly farther from the fire. The warmth still reaches you, but you do not need to be as close. You watch as someone places a small collection of gathered plants nearby. They are arranged loosely but not carelessly. There is intention in the placement. You might reflect on how this differs from earlier moments when everything felt immediate and focused solely on survival. Now there is a hint of planning, of continuity, of thinking beyond the present moment. Evidence from early Holocene sites suggests that human groups began to engage in behaviors that would eventually lead to agriculture, including the selection and encouragement of certain plant species. You let that idea settle gently, not as a sudden shift, but as the beginning of something gradual. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves gently. The land feels alive in a new way. You might wonder how long it will take for these small actions to grow into something larger, for simple observation to become deliberate cultivation, for gathering to become growing. The picture remains incomplete, shaped by many small steps that are difficult to trace individually, but clear when viewed across long periods of time. You sit comfortably, your body relaxed. The environment no longer demands constant attention. There is space now, space to observe, space to think, space to experiment even in small ways. You look out across the landscape once more. The faint green patches, the flowing water, the softening ground, everything points toward change, but not the kind you felt before. Not sudden, not disruptive. This change feels steady, gentle, building slowly. You watch as a small movement near the edge of the camp catches your eye. Someone brushing soil aside, another placing something into the ground. It is a simple action, easy to overlook, and yet it carries meaning, a subtle beginning, a quiet step toward shaping the land rather than simply moving through it. You remain there watching, listening, and slowly absorbing the significance of what you're seeing. The world has warmed, the land has softened, and now something new is beginning, a relationship between people and the environment. Not just survival, but interaction, careful, gradual, transformative. You sit quietly feeling the gentle warmth of the fire while the air around you remains calm and balanced. The cold that once shaped every moment has softened into something far less demanding, allowing your attention to move more freely across the world around you. For a while you remain still. The fire crackles softly. The wind passes with a light steady motion, and the land beyond the camp feels open, no longer held in a tight, unchanging state. After some time you rise again. This time your thoughts turn towards something deeper, not just the changes in the environment, but the way those changes are beginning to affect how people live within it. You step away from the fire and begin to walk slowly around the camp. The ground beneath your feet feels softer in places your steps, leaving faint impressions that linger a little longer before fading. The air carries a subtle richness, now a quiet sign that life is returning in ways that are not always immediately visible. You observe the movement of people. It feels different, less focused on immediate survival, more varied. Someone gathers plants but not with urgency. Another arranges tools with a sense of order rather than necessity alone. There is a quiet shift in purpose. Archaeological data indicates that as environments became more stable, human groups began to develop more complex relationships with their surroundings. This included not only gathering resources but organizing them, storing them, and using them in more deliberate ways. You pause near a small area where items have been placed together. Stones, plant materials, simple tools. They are not scattered. They are grouped. You crouch slightly, examining the arrangement. It feels intentional. A small clue appears in how objects are placed within living spaces. Repeated patterns of organization suggest an emerging sense of structure, where certain areas are used for specific activities. You stand again and take a few steps farther. The camp feels more defined now, not through walls or barriers, but through use. Certain areas seem to serve particular purposes. A place for the fire, a place for gathering, a place for resting. You might wonder how this sense of organization develops, whether it is planned or simply emerges over time. There is no complete agreement on this. Some researchers suggest that structured use of space developed gradually through repeated behavior. Others believe that even early groups may have had an intuitive sense of organization shaped by social interaction. You continue walking your attention moving between people and place. You notice how movements flow naturally. No one rushes. No one hesitates. Each action fits into a quiet rhythm that feels both individual and shared. You return toward the fire, but you choose a place slightly to the side rather than directly at the center. The warmth still reaches you, but you feel comfortable where you are. You watch as someone brings a small bundle of gathered plants and places it near others already collected. There is no immediate use, no urgent preparation, just placement, a quiet step towards storing. A barely noticeable pattern emerges when you consider how repeated gathering and placing of resources can lead to early forms of storage, even if temporary. This allows for a more stable supply of materials, reducing the need for constant searching. You sit down and let your hands rest in your lap. The fire crackles gently. The wind moves softly. The camp feels calm, but within that calm, something important is unfolding. You begin to sense that life here is changing in a deeper way, not just responding to the environment, but beginning to shape it, to structure it, to create patterns that extend beyond immediate needs. You might reflect on how this differs from earlier moments when every action felt tied directly to survival. Now there is space for something more, for planning, for organization, for continuity. Research across sites confirms that as climates stabilized, human societies began to develop more complex behaviors, including early forms of social structure and resource management. You let that idea settle gently. The fire flickers in front of you, its light steady and warm, but now it feels like part of a larger system, a center within a more organized space. You glance around once more. The arrangement of objects, the flow of movement, the quiet cooperation, everything suggests a shift, not sudden, not dramatic, but steady. You might wonder how far this will go, how these small changes will grow over time, whether they will lead to something entirely new. The interpretation is still evolving, shaped by discoveries that continue to reveal how early human behavior developed during this period. You sit comfortably, your body relaxed. The environment supports you now in a way it did not before. The cold no longer dominates. The land no longer restricts. There is room for new patterns to form, room for life to expand. You look out across the landscape once more. The faint green, the flowing water, the soft ground, all of it reflects a world that is becoming more stable, more supportive, more open. And within this world you begin to understand that humans are changing too. Not just surviving, but adapting in new ways, creating patterns, building structure, shaping their environment even if only in small quiet steps. You remain there watching, listening, and slowly absorbing the meaning of this moment, a turning point, not marked by sudden change, but by the steady emergence of something new, a deeper connection between people and the land. You sit quietly, letting the warmth of the fire rest gently against your hands while your thoughts move outward once more. The world around you feels balanced, now no longer held tightly by cold, yet still carrying the memory of it. For a while you remain still. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves with a calm, even rhythm. The land beyond the camp feels open, steady, and quietly alive. After some time you rise again. This time your attention turns not just to what is changing, but to how everything seems connected. You step away from the fire and begin to walk slowly across the edge of the camp. The ground beneath your feet feels softer in places your steps, leaving faint impressions that linger briefly before fading. The air carries a gentle mix of scents now. Earth, water, something faintly green. You pause and look out across the landscape. The stream flows steadily. The grasses move with more ease. The sky holds a soft, even light. Everything feels separate at first glance, but as you stand there observing, you begin to sense the connections between them. Scientific records point to the idea that Earth's climate system is deeply interconnected with changes in one part of the system, often influencing others. Shifts in temperature can affect water flow, which in turn shapes plant growth, which then influences animal life. You take a slow breath, letting that idea settle. The world is not made of isolated pieces. It is a network, You begin to walk again, your attention moving between different elements of the landscape. The ground, the water, the plants, the air. Each one responds to the others. A gentle hint of this lies in how the stream you've visited has changed alongside the surrounding vegetation. As water becomes more available, plants grow more easily, which then stabilizes the soil and influences how water moves. You kneel near a patch of grass and touch the ground. It feels richer, more settled. You look toward the stream. It flows steadily, shaping the land as it moves. You lift your gaze to the sky. The light remains soft, the clouds drifting lightly across it. Everything feels part of the same system. You might wonder how much of this is understood by the people here, not in scientific terms, but through experience, through observation, through living within it. Archaeological and environmental data indicate that early human groups developed a deep awareness of their surroundings, recognizing patterns that help them survive and adapt. They may not have described these connections in words, but they lived them. You stand again and begin to walk back toward the camp. As you move, you notice how your own experience reflects this connection. The warmth of the fire, the softness of the ground, the movement of the wind. Each one affects how you feel, how you move, how you respond. You reach the camp and sit down once more. The fire greets you with its steady warmth. You extend your hands toward it, feeling the heat spread gently through your fingers. Around you, the quiet routines continue, but now you see them differently. Each action connects to the environment. Gathering plants, arranging tools, maintaining the fire, all part of a larger system. A minor but meaningful sign is how the placement of the camp itself reflects an understanding of these connections. It is positioned near water, near resources, in a place that balances exposure and protection. You listen. The fire crackles. The wind moves softly. The distant land feels calm. You might reflect on how this understanding shapes behavior, not just reacting to change, but anticipating it, working with it. There is still no complete agreement on how consciously early humans understood these systems. Some researchers believe their knowledge was primarily practical based on direct experience. Others suggest a deeper intuitive awareness shaped by long periods of observation. You let that thought settle gently. The fire flickers in front of you. Its warmth feels steady, reliable, but now it feels like one part of a larger balance. You look out across the landscape once more. The stream, the grasses, the softening ground, the open sky, everything feels connected. You begin to understand that the changes you've been observing are not isolated events. They are part of a system adjusting itself, finding balance, responding to shifts in temperature, water, and movement. You sit more comfortably, your body relaxed. The environment no longer demands constant attention. It supports you. It allows you to observe, to reflect. You might wonder what this means for the future, how these connections will continue to shape the world, whether balance will hold or shift again. The issue remains open to discussion, as scientists continue to study how climate systems behave over long periods of time, influenced by many interacting factors. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing briefly before fading into the air. It feels like a small reflection of the larger system, a moment of energy, a brief light, part of a continuous process. You remain there, listening, observing, and slowly absorbing the deeper meaning of what you've experienced. The world is not static. It is not simple. It is a system of connections. And as you sit there, surrounded by the gentle warmth of the fire and the quiet balance of the land, you begin to understand that every change you have witnessed is part of that system, a slow, steady movement toward balance. You sit quietly by the fire, your thoughts drifting through everything you have observed. The shifting cold, the returning warmth, the quiet changes in land and life. It all feels connected now, part of something larger that moves slowly, almost patiently. The fire crackles softly. The wind brushes gently across the camp, and the land beyond rests in a calm, balanced state. After a while, you lift your gaze toward the sky. It stretches wide above you, pale and open, much as it did before. Yet now you begin to wonder how much of this story lies hidden within places you cannot see, not just in the land, but in the deeper layers of Earth itself. You rise slowly and step away from the fire once more. The ground beneath your feet feels soft in patches, firm in others, a quiet reminder of the changes still unfolding. The air carries a gentle clarity, balanced and steady. You begin to walk outward, your thoughts focused on something different this time. Not observation alone, but understanding. You imagine how someone far in the future might look back at this moment. How they might try to piece together what happened here long after the traces have faded from the surface. Evidence from ice cores reveals that layers of ice preserve detailed records of past climates, capturing tiny bubbles of air that hold information about temperature, atmospheric composition, and environmental conditions from thousands of years ago. You paused, letting that idea settle, that the very ice you saw in the distance could hold a memory, not in stories, but in physical form. You continue walking, your steps slow and thoughtful. You imagine a place far to the north where ice remains thick and undisturbed. Year after year, snowfall settles and compresses, forming layers that build upon each other, each layer capturing a moment, a season, a shift. You might find yourself wondering how these layers are read, how someone could look at ice and understand the past. Scientists study these layers carefully, analyzing trapped air and chemical signatures to reconstruct climate patterns. Changes in these records can reveal periods of warming and cooling, including abrupt events like the Younger Dryas. You stop and look out across the land. It feels quiet, still, and yet beneath that stillness there are records waiting to be discovered. A subtle trace can be seen in how different elements of the environment preserve information. Not just ice, but also sediments, tree rings, and even pollen trapped in soil layers can provide clues about past conditions. You crouch slightly and touch the ground. It feels soft, alive. You imagine how even this soil might hold traces of what has happened. Tiny fragments, pollen, organic matter, all slowly building a record over time. You stand again and turn back toward the camp. As you walk, the familiar patterns return. The soft ground, the gentle wind, the balanced air. But now your perspective has shifted. You are not just experiencing the present. You're aware of how it will be remembered. You reach the camp and sit down once more near the fire. The warmth greets you steady and comforting. You extend your hands toward it, feeling the heat settle gently into your skin. Around you, the quiet routines continue. People move calmly, their actions shaped by the environment, by memory, by shared understanding. They do not know how this moment will be studied, how it will be interpreted, but they live it fully. A small clue appears in how environments naturally record change over time, even without human intention. Layers build traces, remain, patterns form, creating a history that can be uncovered long after the moment has passed. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves gently. The land remains calm. You might reflect on how different this is from written history. Here, nothing is recorded in words, and yet everything is recorded in some way. In ice, in soil, in the shape of the land. The full explanation of past climate events continues to be refined as new evidence emerges. Each discovery adds to the understanding, revealing more about how the Earth changes over time. You sit comfortably, your body relaxed. The warmth of the fire feels steady, but now it is only one part of a much larger picture. You look out across the landscape once more. The stream flows, the plants grow, the air moves softly, all of it part of a moment that will one day be studied, understood, and placed into a broader story. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing briefly before fading into the air. It reminds you of something, how even the smallest detail can carry meaning, how even a single moment can become part of a larger record. You remain there listening, observing, and slowly absorbing the idea that this world, quiet and simple as it may seem, is leaving behind a story written not in words, but in layers, in patterns, in traces that will endure. And as you sit there surrounded by the gentle warmth of the fire and the quiet balance of the land, you begin to understand that the changes you have witnessed are not lost. They are preserved, waiting to be discovered. You sit quietly by the fire, your hands resting in its gentle warmth, while your thoughts drift across everything you have experienced. The long cold, the quiet return of softness, the subtle ways the land and life have shifted together. The fire crackles softly, the wind moves in a calm, steady rhythm, and the world around you feels balanced yet still full of questions. After a while, you lift your gaze toward the open sky. It stretches wide and pale, unchanged in appearance, yet holding mysteries that are not easily seen. You begin to sense that even though you have observed so much, there are still parts of this story that remain uncertain. You rise slowly and step away from the fire. The ground beneath your feet feels familiar now, a mix of softness and firmness that reflects the balance the land has found. The air carries a gentle clarity, no longer sharp, no longer heavy. You begin to walk your attention turning toward the idea of understanding, not just what has happened, but why. You move across the landscape, your steps steady, your mind calm. The stream flows quietly nearby. The grasses move gently in the wind. Everything feels settled, and yet the deeper reasons behind these changes remain out of reach. Findings from multiple studies indicate that the Younger Dryas remains one of the most studied and debated climate events in Earth's recent history. Its sudden onset and equally sudden end continue to challenge researchers trying to fully explain its causes. You pause, letting that thought settle. Even with all that can be observed, there are still unanswered questions. You take a slow breath and look out across the land. It appears calm, complete, but beneath that calm lies complexity. Some scientists focus on the idea of disrupted ocean currents, suggesting that changes in the movement of warm water may have played a central role. Others consider the possibility of external events such as cosmic impacts, while additional studies explore atmospheric and volcanic influences. There is no single definitive explanation. Instead, there are layers of understanding, each adding to the picture but none fully completing it. You begin to walk again, your pace unhurried. As you move, you notice how this uncertainty does not disturb the world around you. The land continues, the water flows, the plants grow. A faint detail becomes visible when you reflect on this contrast. The Earth does not require a complete explanation to continue its processes. It moves forward, shaped by forces that do not need to be fully understood to be effective. You reach a small rise and stop. From here, the view stretches wide. The landscape appears stable. The changes that once felt dramatic have settled into a new normal. You might wonder how future understanding will evolve, whether new discoveries will bring clarity, or whether some aspects will remain uncertain. The question is still being examined as new methods and technologies allow researchers to explore deeper layers of evidence, uncovering details that were once hidden. You stand quietly, letting the wind move gently around you. It feels calm, balanced, a far contrast to the sharper winds of the colder period. You turn and begin to walk back toward the camp. As you approach, the fire comes into view once more, its warm glow steady and familiar. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads gently, grounding you again. Around you, the quiet routines continue. People move calmly, their actions shaped by the environment that now feels more stable and supportive. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves gently. The world feels at ease. You might reflect on how uncertainty exists alongside stability. How not knowing the full cause of something does not prevent life from continuing. A small but revealing sign is how the environment itself reflects balance without needing explanation. The systems that shape it operate through interaction, not intention, creating outcomes that can be observed, even if they are not fully understood. You settle deeper into your place near the fire. The warmth feels steady. The air feels calm. The land feels settled. And yet the story is not complete. There are still questions, still mysteries, still layers waiting to be uncovered. You look out across the landscape once more. The stream, the grasses, the soft ground, all of it part of a system that continues to evolve. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing softly before fading into the air. It reminds you that even brief moments can carry meaning, that even small details can hold clues. You remain there, listening, observing, and slowly accepting that not every question needs an answer to be meaningful. The world has changed, the balance has returned, and the reasons behind it remain part of an ongoing story, one that continues to unfold, quietly, steadily, and as you sit there surrounded by the gentle warmth of the fire and the calm presence of the land, you begin to understand that mystery is not something to resist. It is something to live alongside. You sit quietly by the fire, the warmth steady against your hands, while your thoughts settle into a calm and reflective space. The long journey you have experienced feels complete in some ways, yet it continues to echo softly through your awareness. The cold that once shaped everything has eased. The land has softened. Life has begun to expand again. For a while you remain still. The fire crackles gently. The wind moves with a soft, even rhythm. The world feels balanced. After some time you lift your gaze and look out across the landscape once more. It appears calm, stable. Yet you now understand how much change lies beneath that calm. You rise slowly and take a few steps away from the fire. The ground beneath your feet feels familiar now, a gentle mix of firmness and softness. Your steps leave faint impressions, small traces that linger briefly before fading. You walk a short distance and pause, letting your eyes move across the land. The stream flows steadily. The grasses move with ease. The air carries a quiet richness. Everything feels alive in a way that was not possible before. Long-term observations reveal that the transition into the Holocene created conditions that allowed human societies to develop in new ways, eventually leading to more complex communities, agriculture, and settled life. You take a slow breath, letting that idea settle. The changes you have witnessed are not just part of the past. They shape the future. You stand quietly, your thoughts drifting gently. You begin to reflect on what this period teaches, not in a formal sense, but in a quiet, personal way. You have seen how the earth can shift, how warmth can turn to cold, how stability can be interrupted, and how over time balance can return. A small but meaningful sign is how resilience appears in every part of this story. The land adapts, the plants return, the animals adjust, and people find ways to continue. You walk slowly back toward the camp. The fire comes into view once more, its glow steady and comforting. You sit down, extending your hands toward the warmth. The heat spreads gently, grounding you. Around you, the quiet routines continue. People move calmly, their actions shaped by the environment that now supports them more easily. You listen. The fire crackles softly. The wind moves gently. The world feels settled. You might reflect on how this connects to the present. Today, the environment still changes. Climate still shifts. And people continue to respond, adapt, and adjust. There is no single definitive explanation for every change, and there is no single path forward. Different conditions lead to different responses shaped by knowledge, experience, and circumstance. You let that thought settle. The connection between past and present feels clear, not in a direct line, but in a shared pattern. Change, adaptation, balance. You glance toward the horizon once more. It stretches wide and calm. You now see it differently. Not as something fixed, but as something that evolves. A system in motion. You might wonder what lessons remain hidden within this history. What insights can still be uncovered? Researchers are still piecing this together, examining evidence from many sources to better understand how past climate events can inform present and future decisions. You sit a little more comfortably, your body fully relaxed. The warmth of the fire feels gentle. The air feels calm. The land feels steady. You watch as a small spark rises from the fire, glowing softly before fading into the air. It feels like a quiet symbol, a brief moment of light, part of a larger pattern. You remain there, listening, observing, and slowly absorbing the meaning of everything you have experienced. The earth changes, it shifts, it finds balance, and life continues within it, adapting, responding, enduring. You begin to understand that this story is not just about the past. It is about a pattern that continues, a rhythm that connects different moments across time. And as you sit there surrounded by the gentle warmth of the fire and the calm presence of the land, you feel that rhythm settle gently into your awareness. A quiet reminder that change is not the end of stability. It is part of the process that creates it. You sit quietly by the fire, the warmth soft and steady against your hands, as the world around you settles into a calm that feels deeper than before. The long stretch of change of cold and return of uncertainty and balance now feels complete in a quiet and gentle way. The fire crackles softly, the wind moves with a light even rhythm, and the land beyond rests in a peaceful stillness. For a while you remain exactly where you are. There is no need to move, no need to observe closely. Everything you have experienced seems to rest within you now like a memory that does not need to be spoken to be understood. You take a slow breath. The air feels calm, balanced, comfortable. You look out across the landscape one last time. The stream flows steadily, its surface reflecting the soft light of the sky. The grasses move gently, their colour fuller now, their presence more certain. The ground beneath everything feels stable, supportive, ready to hold what comes next. Long-term records reveal that this new period of stability allowed life on Earth to flourish in ways that had not been possible during the colder, more unpredictable times. Plants spread, animals adapted. Human communities began to grow in new and lasting ways. You let the thought settle gently. The world has not simply returned to what it was. It has become something new. You shift slightly, settling more comfortably near the fire. The warmth reaches you easily now, no longer something you depend on, but something you appreciate. You listen. The soft crackle of wood, the gentle movement of wind, the quiet presence of life around you. A small but meaningful sign is how everything feels connected, not through struggle, but through balance. The land, the water, the air, and the people all move within a shared rhythm that no longer feels fragile. You might reflect on how this moment feels compared to the beginning of your journey, the early stillness of the cold world, the sudden return of harsh conditions, the long process of change, and now this, a calm that feels earned, a stability that feels real. There is no single definitive explanation for every detail of how the Earth reached this balance. The processes remain complex, shaped by many forces interacting over long periods of time, but the result is here, present, felt in every small detail. You look toward the horizon again. It stretches wide and open, no longer holding the same sense of uncertainty. Instead, it feels welcoming, full of possibility. You sit quietly, your body relaxed, your thoughts slow and gentle. The fire flickers in front of you, its light soft and steady. You watch as a small spark rises, glowing briefly before fading into the air. It feels like a quiet ending, or perhaps a quiet continuation. Researchers are still piecing together the full story of these ancient changes using evidence from ice soil and countless other sources. Each discovery adds to the understanding, revealing how the Earth moves through cycles of change and balance. You let that idea rest. There is no need to follow it further. No need to analyze, only to feel, to be present in this moment. You listen to the gentle sounds around you. The fire, the wind, the distant movement of water. Everything feels calm, steady, complete. You might notice how your breathing has slowed, how your body feels lighter, more at ease. The journey through time has come to a quiet resting point. Not an ending, but a pause. A moment of stillness within a much larger story. You remain there surrounded by the soft warmth of the fire and the peaceful presence of the land, letting everything settle gently into place. And as the light begins to soften even further as the world grows quieter and more distant, you allow your thoughts to drift, slowly, gently, like the wind moving across the open land, like the water flowing quietly through the stream, like the fire fading into a soft, steady glow. You feel the calm deepen, the world becoming quieter, the details fading into a gentle background, and within that quiet you rest, not needing to hold on to every detail, not needing to follow every thought, just allowing the feeling of balance to remain. The Earth has changed. It has found its rhythm again, and you for this moment are part of that rhythm. You sit quietly, breathing slowly as the fire continues its soft and steady glow. And as everything settles into stillness, you allow yourself to drift gently with it. The fire burns low, now its light softer, its warmth more subtle, as if it too is settling into rest. The wind moves quietly across the land, no longer carrying sharp edges or sudden changes, but a calm, even presence that feels almost like a lullaby. You remain where you are, your body at ease, your thoughts light and unhurried. The world around you begins to soften, edges blur, sounds grow quieter. The distant stream continues its gentle flow, but it feels farther away now, like a memory fading into the background. You take a slow breath, then another, each one deeper, more relaxed. The warmth of the fire lingers, but it no longer demands your attention. It simply exists steady and reassuring. The land stretches out beyond you, calm and endless, holding the quiet story of everything that has come before. The long cold, the sudden change, the gradual return, all of it now part of a peaceful balance. You do not need to think about it anymore. You do not need to follow it. It is enough to know that it happened, that the world changed, and that it found its way forward. The night settles gently around you. Not dark, not heavy, just quiet, soft. You feel your body sink a little deeper into stillness. Your breathing slow, your thoughts drifting. The fire flickers one last time, its glow fading into a soft, steady warmth. And as the world around you becomes quieter and more distant, you allow yourself to rest. Completely, gently, drifting with the calm rhythm of the earth itself. Sweet dreams,